name is Tracy, and I am one of the directors in Student Services, and I am so glad to see all of your faces. Administrators, we have met before, we met this summer, but the assistants who have come today and the secretaries who have come today, I am so glad that you are here, and I want you to hear me say, as a former school administrator, you are so critical in your building for making sure things go the right way. You are the one that keeps the administrators straight and on track and making sure we're getting this letter done and we're getting that letter done and this was coded right and did you catch that parent and I've got this parent waiting for you kind of thing. So your role is absolutely critical and important. And so this morning, we just want to, I want to open up with just kind of continuing from Mr. Chambers, planting some seeds, giving you some things to ponder and think about. After that, Brian is going to go over some of our policies and procedures. There's been some things this year that have been pretty bumpy for us. There's some confusion on various policies and procedures, so we're going to try to clear that confusion up. Mr. Chapman and Katie from Mr. McGinnis, our school board attorney's office, is going to present on Title IX to make sure we're all on the same page with that. And then if you guys at the end have some questions, feel free to ask them. So if my little clicker do here will work. Sorry. There we go. So how many of you have seen this before, this picture? Just curious. Hopefully just about all of you have seen it. I know in our offices here, we're recording today, so Mr. Paul's telling me I got to pick this thing up. In our offices here, we all have this hanging in our office, and if you have not seen this before, this is the vision for the next generation of Okaloosa schools. These are the 6 areas that are important to our district. These are the things that make us an A+ district. And when you think about the job of discipline or being in the discipline office, being a disciplinarian, I started thinking this morning about when we look at our vision and what we want the next generation of Okaloosa schools to look like, which areas do discipline influence? And it's almost all of them if you really think about it. How we handle discipline affects our Okaloosa family. How we as administrators handle it, what we do in our schools, influences how our teachers see us. It influences how our teachers relate to our kids, how our teachers continue to build relationships with our kids, which leads to relationships, right? We've all got to be on the same page. We've got to communicate what's working, what's not working. This is what I need help with. This is what I don't understand. Brian, this is what I don't agree with. Like, it's okay. Accountability. Not only holding our students accountable, that's important, but quite honestly, we have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to hold our teachers accountable. And we got to help our parents be accountable for their important role as well. If we don't have behaviors under control, it affects our continuous learning. Obviously, we're being student focused because we want to create the most positive, best learning environment we possibly can in our schools. We want kids to feel appreciated. We want kids to feel valued. We want them to feel safe. Safer schools, obviously, big, huge part of discipline. Truly, community engagement, it matters. It's how we relate to our families, how we bring our families into the school. The more we engage our community, the more you're going to see families being proactive and helping you help their students. So what you do is very, very much a part of the vision of next generation in Okaloosa. So back in July, we met about mid-July to talk about what our goals in discipline are this year. And so one of the things we talked about is we need our classrooms to be conducive to learning. We know that the learning gaps are massive. So we need kids to be able to come to school to learn so teachers can teach, they can learn, and everybody can be good to go. We want to reduce the number of referrals, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. And a piece of that is about if we continue to do what we've always done, we're going to get the exact same results. So we have some schools that are going into year 3 of PBIS. We have some schools going into year 2. We have some kids doing year 1, and we have some schools doing year 1 redo, right? Because last year was a hard year to truly implement something that big and that new. We need consistency. So I want you to think about something. Sometimes there are scenarios that we deal with at this level that happen at one school, and an administrator proceeds a certain direction, and this is how it's handled. And you could call 3 to 4 other principals and say, hey, let me give you a scenario. What would you do? And what do you think happens? You get different answers. And that's a problem. That's a problem. If I'm a kid, it really shouldn't matter which school I'm going to. If I'm doing the same wrong thing, I shouldn't be all placed at one school and given after-school detention at another, right? Now, and I say that, and that's an extreme example. Obviously, alt placements, there's a pattern and a history of behavior, so there's a lot more to that. But my point being that it is so important that you're tuned in today, that we're listening to Brian, that we're using our discipline notebooks we got. We're looking at the matrix for each level to ensure that we're all at least trying to be on the same page. And when we're in doubt, what do? Call Brian. He always answers. But everybody's here, Brian. That's why. I can call Brian at 7:45 and he'll tell me he's already dealt with 10 things every morning. He works hard, and I appreciate all that you do, Brian. Thorough investigations, making sure that we are truly finding the facts and we're basing our decisions on facts. And then one of our other goals was improving student training program. To me, when I revisited this, I thought about, really it's a lot more than just training program. Really, it's about improving student training. Because just like Mr. Chambers said, once upon a time, we had families that handled business at home. They taught expectations for public behavior. Sometimes they'd mess up. We'd call home. They'd handle it. We don't live in that world anymore. And we can't control that. All we can do is control what we do and how we react to that. So I don't know if you can see these numbers. Can you guys read them? So I pulled yesterday, I believe it was, what are our total number of discipline referrals in the district as of yesterday? And so if you look at that top row, so far in 9 plus, another 4, 13-ish weeks of school, we've had 11,083 discipline referrals logged into the AS400. So think about that. That's almost 1 in 3 kids have had at least one discipline referral at this point. That's huge. So then I sorted them in order. So our number 1 problem is repeated tardies. So I say to you, I challenge you to sit there and think, what have you done about that? If you're a school that's sitting with 400 repeated tardy referrals, what have the conversations sounded like with your team? Inappropriate behavior, that's the catch-all. 1,145 kids have inappropriately behaved in some form or fashion, and we all know that's the code we typically use when it doesn't fit anything else, right? 102 kindergartners, and I say this with all the love in my heart. Y'all, they're 5. They're 5. Some of them have never been in a structured environment in their life. You look at, this is the one I was really thinking about. So 7 kindergartners, 6 first graders, 13 second graders, these little itty bitties using inappropriate language. And I'm going to tell you guys, I know you've heard it on the phone. That's all they hear at home sometimes. That's all they know. So when those littles who have not been in that structured environment, who don't have parents who recognize the F-bomb as the F-bomb, that's just an everyday noun, verb, adjective, adverb, right? However, whatever form they want to use it in. Is that a discipline referral, or is that a teachable moment? Is that the moment that we say, hey, Terry, I understand that sometimes at your house, you might hear that word, you might hear it on TV, you might be out in public, you might hear it at the store, you might hear mom and dad or brother or sister, but at school, we gotta follow the school rules. And our rules here is that's a word we can't use anymore. But I'm just telling you guys, if their parents use it all the time every day, they probably use it with their parents all the time, every day. Because it's just part of their life. So we've got to teach them. We've got to help them. Bus. I'm not even going there. Disruptive, class disruptions. That's another big one. And I say to you, if you were sitting in that teacher's classroom, would you be able to sit still? Would you be able to not be tempted to talk to your buddy because maybe you're just clicking on an iPad, looking at websites, filling in a worksheet? Or maybe you're watching a movie and you're not doing anything with the movie. Or maybe you didn't sleep very good last night because your mom and dad were screaming and yelling in the next room and you're really tired, so the teacher's up there lecturing and just talking, and you put your head down because you didn't sleep good and you're tired. Are we writing kids up for sleeping? Is that really a classroom disruption? Or are we saying, sweetie, you look tired. Are you okay? Can I help you with something? Just some thoughts. So we've got lots of referrals. So I dug up some data to look at where we've been. So starting with the 15-16 year, we've got the number of referrals, the number of actions we take. In most incidents, we do more than one action, right? Because a lot of times we'll do parent call and maybe verbal reprimand at the minimum, right? And then I did a ratio. So for every incident, oops, that's probably not good. For every incident, about how many actions are we taking? And look, guys, look at the trend. And these numbers are real. Down here in 15-16, 1.13 was the ratio. Each year, it has progressively gotten more and more and more that we're doing. Is behavior getting better? Raise your hand if you would think behavior's getting worse, if you had to base it on this year. And that goes back to what Mr. Chambers was saying. It doesn't mean we don't take action. We have to take action. Okay, there are consequences to the incidents. We have to take action. But we got to do more than just take action, because that's not working. So Brian and I talk all the time about what is your vision for discipline at your school? How often does your discipline team meet to review your discipline data? Ms. Lightbourne, if I'm the API and I'm in charge of ELA and math, what do I do with my data? Mm-hmm. Act upon it. So if I know that third grade is busting with classroom disruption, have I sat down with my third grade team to say, okay, let's think about these kids that are getting in trouble. Why do we think they're getting in trouble? Why can't they sit still? What are you doing when they tend to get fidgety? Why do you think he hit her? Is he mad about something? You think he might need to talk to the counselor? Or just his teacher? Have we even asked these kids, what's going on? How can I help you? Do your teams get together? And when I say teams, not just your discipline teams, your grade level teams. Like I know at Meg's, our grade level would get together, and for some people, when I first got there, I'll be honest, we griped. We talked about the kids that were driving us nuts, but we began to shift our mindset. And instead of just talking about who was driving us nuts, we talked about, well, who is that kid working for? Who's not having issues? Well, what's your trick? What are you doing? Let me try that in my classroom. Are those conversations happening in your school? Because that's how we help these kids. That's how we do things different. I say to teachers all the time, if you're telling me you can't get your job done because of the behaviors of the students, what are you doing different? What are you, adult, doing different? Whose vision is it? Did you just roll it out to the staff and say, this is what we're doing and this is how it's going to go? Or is your staff part of creating your vision for what you want your school to look like? Do we model the behavior we want to see? Have you ever heard that teacher screaming at her class to be quiet? Or that kid that gets really hateful and disrespectful to their teacher and raises their voice at the teacher? What does the teacher do in return? Gets louder? Adults have to remember, it's not a power struggle. You have all the power. But if that kid's yelling, they're frustrated and mad about something, right or wrong, they're frustrated and mad about something. So when they do that, yes, that frustrates you. So how are you modeling the appropriate thing you should do when you're mad or frustrated? Kathy, I'm getting frustrated. I'm gonna take just 1 minute and I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna take some deep breaths because I'm really frustrated and I don't want to say anything I'll regret. That's how we teach kids to do it different. Sending them to STP is not going to keep them from raising their voice at an adult the very next time they're mad or frustrated. Do students know your expectations? And we all know kids don't get it after the first time. If they did, we'd have all level 5s in reading and math. Behavior's the exact same way. Just like we teach reading, just like we teach math, just like we teach science, we've got to teach behavioral skills. We've got to teach these kids who don't know how to behave what appropriate behavior looks like. Do we practice discipline with dignity? Do we belittle kids when they mess up? Or do we accept the fact that they're children and we're going to help them do better next time? That, yes, I'm going to hold you accountable. Like, I can't tell you how many times I'd say to kids, I hate this. I am now in a position where I'm going to have to send you home. I don't ever want to be in this position again, so let's talk about how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? Because when you come back 3 days from now, I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to be your biggest cheerleader. I'm not doing this because I'm mad. I'm doing it because that's what the rules are and that's what I have to do. But how can I help you? And what do our conversations with our parents sound like? When we call a parent, because Kathy's messed up again, and I am sick of Kathy. I see her at least once a week, and I'm over it, and it's petty little stuff. So my principal won't let me outplace and get rid of, because my principal doesn't believe in that. And I'm sick of it. I don't have time for her every day. So when I call the parent, is it, I got Kathy in my office again? Or is it Kathy's mom or dad or grandma or grandpa? I am calling. How are you doing today? I need your help. I need your help. Like, I have tried to help Kathy and she's not getting it, and I don't know how to help her get it, and I absolutely don't want to have to give her any more consequences. I need your help. Rarely will you have a parent tell you they can't help you.
Go back to that slide, please. So I want you just to think for a second. There's some of you, as we just went through this, if we're being honest with ourselves, there's some of you who believe in everything that was just stated. There are some who might be a little bit more old school and saying, I don't know about all that. If we're being honest, right? So again, just thinking about where we are in public education today, thinking about the behavior of kids today, thinking about our own data, it's definitely not going down, right? It's going up. So you think about that.
Sorry.
So you think about that, and again, how are we doing certain things differently? And going through those questions right there, and then some of the statements that are stated, you can see, just even looking at the room, some of it's uncomfortable. Just talking about this is uncomfortable because we all have our own beliefs and the way we believe in disciplining students. You have to be able to communicate that to the teachers as well. So there's that pressure on you of how you're going to handle this kid who continues to come to the office who's doing things the wrong way. So you feel that pressure because you want to support those teachers. But the best way to support those teachers, support the school, support the kids, is to get the behavior to change, which is not easy at all, because if it was easy, we'd have the pill to do so, right? We'd have the silver bullet to do so. But again, these type of conversations, you're the AP in charge of discipline at your school. So what does a faculty meeting look like? Where there's a small segment of that faculty meeting where we're talking about this, or these are the type of questions that we want our grade level or our department to discuss. We talked about the vision. Does everybody know the vision? So when we have these type of conversations, the same thing that we do on the curriculum side, sometimes these topics are uncomfortable. Sometimes people have different beliefs, and that's just fine. That's just fine. But again, how are we going to change the direction of discipline? And by no means do we have just schools that are just out of control by any means. But all of you, if we are honest with ourselves, some of this you go, sometimes you go, I'm beyond frustrated. Anyone frustrated this week? Right? But again, we have to be open-minded in the way that we are handling discipline and handling students. We have to be open-minded. It has nothing at all to do with trying to be lenient. Because if kids are having the wrong behaviors, they're going to be held accountable. They're absolutely going to be held accountable. But how do we teach these kids? Many of you know we're the middle school folks. I used to say all the time, 6th grade, you already know the direction some of the kids are going. In 6th grade, you know the direction that some of the kids are going. And if you don't intervene, and we all want to, but if we don't intervene, we're not going to get those kids back. I could go on and on right now, but anyway, I appreciate it.
So I know all of you know who Brian is, right? Is there anybody that doesn't know who Brian is? Okay. Erica, would you stand up? Yes. Yes, ma'am. Does everybody know who Erica is? Is there anybody who doesn't know who Erica is? Be honest. Okay. Erica is one of our truancy officers, but she's also in charge of PBIS. So, the reason why I asked that is I know all of you know Brian and call Brian on a regular because you're dealing with discipline. But if you're not in charge of PBIS or involved with PBIS and part of the team, that's a problem. Okay? So think about that, and when you go back, if you're not, then you need to get yourself involved. Because discipline and PBIS are this. If they are two separate things, we have a problem. Because then PBIS is not going to work. Because we're not on the same page. So as I sat there, I looked around, and I know some of the folks that have met with Erica, and I know some of you haven't. So I really think that that's something that you need to be involved with, that these should not be two separate things. PBIS is going to help you make the changes that we're talking about. And Erica's pretty darn dynamic, just saying. Okay? All right.
Raise your hand, and I should have done my homework and kind of prepped somebody for this, but who, is anybody willing to kind of share what your school's vision on discipline is? No? Thanks, Mr. Schroeder. Hold on. You got to have this.
When we talk about discipline at my school, and I was at Meg's with Miss Lamb, so I kind of got a head start. So she kind of trained me up a little bit. So I'm cheating. So we at Destin Middle School, I know that everybody thinks we have, all rich kids that have no problems. That is not true. We have a huge amount of ELLs. We have a huge amount of new students moving in and out, transient, that are coming from all aspects of life that do not know how to behave, do not know what Okaloosa County is all about. So we have a proactive approach with PBIS. I was taught by some great administrators to always be on the offense. I'm always on the offense, not on the defense. I don't want to be reactive. I want to be proactive. So everything that I do as a old coach is to always be ahead of the curve. What are you doing in the cafeteria to prevent discipline issues? What are you doing in the hallways to prevent discipline issues? What are you doing in relationships when you say, hey, to Johnny to stop, he doesn't cuss you out? And what are the teachers doing? And what do you do with your teachers to help support them so they feel like they can come to you? When I first got there, I think we had like 700 and something referrals. Every student had a referral. I mean, it was like craziness. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And now we started our PBIS, and we've, even this year, and my wife told me not to say this, but we've reduced our referrals by 40% this year. That's crazy. And it's been crazy, right? It's been crazy. The biggest struggle that we're having right now is the mental resiliency part and the drama part of our students not being in school. That's what's causing us the issues. But we're our third year in, and we have the Marlin Way, and it's the core values that every single teacher has in the school. So every single teacher has come together and said, this is what's important to us. So they're sold out or bought in, and they're proactive. Instead of me saying, hey, this is what you're doing, this is what they said they want to do. And I said, how can I help you with that? And now we've added the part on resiliency and how for students to handle conflict. That's new for us this year. We made that up. So it's like I was having that problem. So how am I going to solve it? I'm just going to deal with it. So our philosophy is to be out and spend as much time and energy being proactive as reactive. I could sit in my office and receive them. I'm going to spend the same amount of time. I'd rather be on the front end, and therefore now I've got the parents bought in, I got the students bought in. They see Mr. Schroeder, they know, hey, we better be right, and it's just not me, but it's everyone else. So we've changed the mindset. It was hard the first 2 years. It was hard, but now we've got to change. So that's our mindset, is to be proactive instead of reactive. Build those relationships with those kids. I have 15 boys I check with every day. Look them in the eyeball. We're going to have a good day? I have to. because they're the 15 ones that come to my office all the time, you know. So we've had 100 and something kids, different kids, come to the office this year, but we've only had a very, very small amount of kids come to the office twice, and that's the goal, because every kid's going to mess up.
Thank you for sharing. And he brings up a great point when he talks about all the teachers having the same core values. So as the administrator right now, are you sitting there thinking, I know the rules of every single teacher's classroom? Because if the answer to that is no, then you have not set your school-wide expectations. I can tell you at MEGS, it's be safe, be respectful, be responsible, and own your actions. And anything in between that we want you to do, we can tie to one of those 4 things. It's critical. So when Johnny goes running down the hall, the conversation is, oh, what would we say, Sarah? What am I going to say? And literally they would say, be safe. What were you doing that wasn't safe? Running in the hall. Why is that not safe? I could fall and scrape my knee. It's teaching the kids why the rules are the rules. Know your why. Know the why. That's okay. Miss Ard, Miss Ard's going to share part of her, when she was a principal, part of her discipline philosophy and vision.
So it kind of goes with what Mr. Schroeder was saying, and Miss Johnson, the AP at Elliott Point, told me a little story this morning, and it kind of made me feel good. Not that what the child said to her, but she said, the kids miss you at Elliott Point, and she said she was disciplining a high flyer, and he said to her, I wish you'd get fired and Miss Ard would come back. So that makes me feel good, because I know, I think I know which child she's talking to, so I was with that child all the time, giving discipline, but that relationship was there, that he still misses me, even though we spent a lot of, bad times together. So those relationships are huge, And, in this role, sometimes, I've actually called y'all. Sometimes parents get upset with the way things are handled, and sometimes they end up here. And there has been some situations where some teachers have felt that maybe administrators were not supporting them. Discipline is bad, and discipline is rough. And I think one of the ways that you can help this is really involve your teachers in the discipline process. Sometimes when those kids are in your office, you hear stories, you know what's going on. I mean, I've had kids leave my office and put my head down and be in tears because I just learned what is going on every day or what they just saw that morning, and those teachers aren't privy to that. So when you have those conversations with them and you can pull those teachers in and talk about that and talk about how you can handle that situation differently, or as Mr. Chambers brought up, have a faculty meeting very soon and talk about discipline. Acknowledge that it's not what it was, and talk about what can we do, what is our vision, how are we modeling it, and what can we do differently. Because if we just keep putting kids in STP, I mean, there were some days when it was rough right before the holidays, and I'd open up that STP door and I'd look in and I'd be like, oh my gosh, can I squeeze one more in, and shut the door and run? And it's the same kids in there all the time. You know that. Y'all are laughing because you've done that to your STP person before, like, hey, run, But it's not helping. But sometimes your teachers, if they're part of those discussions, because right now they're overwhelmed, you know that. Y'all are telling us that. We know that. We see it. But if you can involve those in the conversations and helping them know that they are supported and coming up with some of the solutions, I think you'll get some good leverage with that.
Thank you, Miss Ard. Brian, I know you're watching the clock. It'll be okay if we go over just a little bit, right? Yes. Okay. Notice I didn't wait for an out loud answer there. Okay. Just a couple quick things. Well, we got him going.
I don't want that.
Mr. Neely's going to say you have to have it.
I don't want that. But this is the importance of having everybody together. I don't want this recorded. So this is the importance of
We know that we've heard our whole training is kids come to school in kindergarten with different amounts of language, right? Who are my elementary people? We know that some people come to kindergarten and they're very expressive. They can tell you anything and everything their mom may or may not want you to know, right? They can communicate how they're feeling. They can tell you what they want, what they need. And then we have some kids who come to kindergarten, and I experienced this firsthand, who don't know their real name. They know their nickname, but they don't even know their real name, right? And so we have a person new to education that joined our mental health counselor department this year. And so he's been in mental health, but he's new to education. And so he found this study on language. And so he was telling me, like, I'd never heard that before. Like, did you know that on average kids know X amount of words, but some kids only know this many, some kids might know that many? And I kind of laugh, and I'm like, yeah. I was like, yeah, that's like one of the things they teach you, one of the first things they teach you when you're in education. And he goes, that explains it. I said, it explains what? And so just so you know, this particular person is fascinated by behavior. And he says that explains the behavior issues. Because behavior is a form of communication. When kids can't find the words, when they don't know the words, they don't know what they feel. They don't know what's made them mad sometimes. Sometimes, like middle school, high school, they're just a hormonal mess. They're just mad because they're mad because their hormonal levels are all off, right? There's no words to that. And so sometimes we act because we can't communicate what's wrong. So behavior is a form of communication. So when they can't communicate it appropriately, that's our job to then teach them the skills. So when you feel this way, however it is, instead of overturning tables and chairs, let's come up with something else you can do that lets me know you need some help. Help. Always ask your kids, how can I help you? How can I help you? Especially those that you see over and over and over. And Sarah, I keep thinking, woo, Mac and Sarah were my former APs, and when the EBD program came to Megs the first year, thank you, Miss Youngma. You know the kids I'm talking about. Honest to goodness, man, I don't know what I would have done without my team, but we learned a lot that year. And we tweaked things and turned things upside down a bunch of times, and the kids would say, you're changing it all again? Yeah, because it's not working. We got to try something different. But I will tell you, when I'd see it, how am I going to help you? Like, we've talked about this, we've talked about that. Like, I'm all out of ideas. How can I help? What can I do? Positive intent, real quick. Imagine this. You're walking down the halls. This is probably mostly secondary example. You're walking down the hall. You see a kid coming towards you. They're on their cell phone just texting just as fast as. How many times does somebody who may or may not even know that child say, hey, you're not supposed to be on your phone. Give me that phone. Instead of, hey, you look upset. Are you okay? Well, why do you say that? Well, I see you're on your phone, and I know you're not supposed to be on your phone. Can I help you with something? I need to talk to my mom. Okay. Well, let's go get you in touch with mom so we can talk about what's going on. And in the meantime, you can fill me in on what's happened. Instead of attacking the kids with assuming they're up to no good naughtiness, maybe something has happened and they need our help. Positive intent is huge. So in closing, I would just like to say, and just kind of point out, so I don't know what books you guys go to when you're looking for new ideas. I'm a big book person. These are a few of my favorite when it comes to discipline. Conscious Discipline, if you've never heard of it. The premise is adults have to be able to self-regulate before we can teach kids to self-regulate. Another big premise, be the behavior you want to see. Don't take it personally. Yelling at a kid when they're in crisis and they're in that red brain state where they can't hear anything you're saying, that's just a waste of everybody's energy. Great book, highly recommend. If you're working on your school culture, creating the school family, huge, huge. Because when you build that family atmosphere, kids know you got their back. And typically, if they know you got their back, they're going to work hard for you to do better. Discipline with Dignity, fantastic read, quick read. And then this is my favorite, and I would like to thank the ESE department for this book. Kids These Days, anybody read it? Probably one of the best books I have read in a decade. Kids These Days, how often do we say that? This psychologist, one, she's funny, and I don't remember who told me, get it on Audible. If you have a drive to work, listen to her because she's funny and she's the reader. She explains it. The answers are here. She explains it, why kids are the way they are. Look for resources. Talk to your teams. Problem solve. Figure out what's going on and don't be afraid to try new things. So just some seeds planted. I know I saw Miss Lightbourne's going to talk to you.
So you guys know we're going out to schools and looking at academics right now, right? We're doing our walkthroughs and doing all of that. And every school, I don't think there's been one that hasn't said discipline is a problem this year. We're really struggling. Middle school, 6th grade, off the chain, but when I look at the referrals, it looks like 7th grade's just as bad. So one of the things I want you guys to think about is, Tracy said a lot of things today, and they're all very important, but how are they playing out at your school? When you have a faculty meeting, is discipline a part of it? Do teachers have input on how we're disciplining, what's happening in my classrooms? Do you meet with them? We just ended a quarter. Did we have a team? She keeps saying the word team. What's team to you? Is it just you and the principal? Because it's probably not enough. Because from what I hear, we don't have the answers. I don't have the answers. But maybe some of our teachers have some good ideas. So have we, at the end of the quarter, sat down with a team, a real team, whether it be grade level chairs or just people you know have good positive relationships in the classroom, who is on your team to help build a better discipline situation for you? Because every school has said discipline's a problem. Every school. So we get that. And my answer back is, what are we doing differently? And if we're not doing any, the pandemic has taken a toll on everyone. Everyone needs to understand that. And our kids especially. I'm driving to work every day. I'm like, good God, people are so darn angry. And people are going, I almost said it. I didn't say it though. Y'all don't, I'm a Jersey girl, so I'm just saying. Where's Melissa's not here, but she sent me something. But people are flying by, cutting people off, making gestures to each other. So I see that just in society. Well, that doesn't trickle down into school? It certainly does. So what are we doing? How are we helping mental health? Are we doing social emotional learning? Do we have a time? Talked to a school the other day that they set aside a certain amount of time every day and do social emotional learning to try and work with their kids so that they can work on some of these behaviors. Still struggling. Behavior's not going to be great. That's just the bottom line. But what are we doing differently? Are you pulling teams together of people that you know are going to have positive help with you? Make it a team. Not the teacher who sends up a kid every day, because they apparently don't have good classroom management. Because you shouldn't see a kid, several kids, and that's easy. When you sort that on pause, you can see who's sending people all the time. So what's going on in that classroom? Have we addressed that? No, we're just disciplining the kid. But have we addressed the behavior that may be causing the behavior? Think about that. Sort that when you go back and look. Who are my teachers who never send anybody up? What do? Right? What are they doing differently? What's happening in their classrooms? Get those people on your team and then have conversations. Let those people who are sending people up all the time, send them to go see that teacher in action. We don't only have to do classroom rounds for academics. We can do it for how is that teacher really handling the kids and the discipline problems in their classroom. Okay? So think about those things. Like today should be thinking about how do we help ourselves get through such a difficult time? Because the pandemic isn't over, it's having lasting effects, whether they be health, their mental health. And we have to adjust to that. Maybe there needs to be more breaks. Elementary, good God, let them get up. Eric Jensen. Read some Eric Jensen. Trust me. Let them get up. Let kindergarten have an extra 5 or 10 minutes outside. Maybe it's going to make the 20 minutes inside more productive. 6th grade, they're coming to you. They've never had that freedom. If at all they had 2 teachers, right? If they switched. Some of them were still self-contained, and over the last couple of years, who knows what they had. So all of a sudden they have this freedom. I bet a lot of the problems are in class change. What are we doing? What can we do to make that better? Get a team together, talk about it, get the 6th grade teachers together. Hey, we know 6th grade's a problem. What are your ideas? But you guys should be meeting with a team of people quarterly because discipline's a problem. Okay? You're not alone. And that's how I feel you are right now. Don't be alone. More heads will help you. Okay? All right. You guys ready? Steve.
Yes,
You wanna switch gears? Okay. Do we need to plug a computer in or
Yes.
anything? Okay.
Okay. Do we want to?
Pass that off to, or do you have a mic, Steve, or you holding that one?
I mean, this isn't.
Yeah, if you guys want to take just a couple minutes, if you need a bathroom, they're through that hall.
I think so because I think this isn't really. I don't think.
Without further ado.
Good morning. Yes, I'm Steve Chapman, the Equity Specialist and the Title IX Coordinator for the district. And so many times when you call our office and ask about a potential Title IX issue, it is not that I'm putting you off. Trust me. We are learning Title IX. It's a lot of regulations. There's a lot of questions that we have. And so one of my resources that I always go to is Ms. Kate Henderson. She's an attorney with Mr. McGinnis's office. And so she works with me hand in hand. And we've had a lot of conversations about most of the situations that we deal with as Title IX. So the biggest piece I want you to take away is this. Title IX has shifted and changed the way we do discipline entirely when it comes to a Title IX issue. And there's certain regulations, things that we must follow within the regulations that we can stay in compliance as a district. So Ms. Kate Henderson is going to present today, and we could be able to answer any questions hopefully you have afterwards. But this is something that's mandated, so it's something that we've got to get right in Okaloosa. Fortunately, so far we haven't had an official, formal Title IX investigation all the way through the process. I've had them start a couple, but in the middle of it, they change or the circumstances change, and we shift back to a informal process. But it's very critical that we try to understand Title IX. It's not exciting, but it's necessary. Okay? So at this time, I'll turn to the hands of Ms. Kate Henderson.
Thank you. All right. Thank y'all for having me. Like Mr. Chapman said, we've been learning all about Title IX for the past 2 years and how it's changed. So kind of the goal is today is just go over an overview of what's changed. And then later on, we can go into more specifics as needed. But yeah, so kind of just the objectives of today is, like I said, just understanding the basics, and then kind of understanding the new policy that goes along with the federal Title IX regulations. And then, unfortunately, Title IX kind of covers the least fun topic of them all is sexual harassment. And yeah, so we're going to kind of learn today how that's shifted from mostly a college issue to how it applies to K through 12 as well. All right. So, as I'm sure y'all have read before, that's Title IX kind of where we started with all of this. These are really the first significant changes that have taken place since 1975. The changes include training requirements, a designation of a Title IX coordinator, which for us is Mr. Chapman. The definition of sexual harassment has been given a definition, although, as we'll see, there's definitely some gray area there. There's also been an increased emphasis on due process. So our complainant, which is the alleged victim, and then the respondent, which is the alleged defendant, if you will, kind of giving both of those parties their due process and their chance to be heard. And then there's new procedural requirements for investigations. So all of that is going to be done throughout what we call a grievance process. I mean, like Mr. Chapman mentioned earlier, there's also an informal process. So those are kind of the big changes that have taken place in these new regulations. All right. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, one of the big changes in the new regulations is a definition of sexual harassment. And this is really boring, but I'm just going to read it from here because it is very important. So sexual harassment is defined as conduct on the basis of sex that satisfies one or more of the following. And here we have 3 different categories. The first one, an employee of the district conditioning the provision of an aid, benefit, or service of the district on an individual's participation in unwelcome sexual conduct. That one's kind of our quid pro quo category. Then I'm going to jump down to the third one, sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, or stalking. These are all defined by federal, kind of the FBI's definition of these categories. But then our second one is the most trickiest, the most gray area for us is unwelcome conduct determined by a reasonable person to be so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it effectively denies a person equal access to the district's education program or activity. So all that to say is there's a lot of wiggle room in there, but what I want y'all to understand for that one is the so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. So it's a little bit of a higher standard, but with all of that said, anytime you think something is going to fall into that category, for now, go ahead and give Mr. Chapman a call and say, hey, I'm not sure if this is sexual harassment, because sometimes there's one little factor that could take it into that category. All right. Okay, so for Title IX versus the other school board policies, Mr. Chapman can give you more details on this, but in the other policies, there are a different code that goes along with that. But for the Title IX, per the federal regulations, anything that involves sexual harassment is going to invoke Title IX. So they have to be handled differently than other misconduct. So anytime you think that you're going to have a sexual harassment situation, call your Title IX coordinator and get in touch with him and see if we're meeting that definition of Title IX sexual harassment. I'm sorry.
Can you explain why that's so important that they call you before?
Yes.
Yeah.
So part of it's going to be, and we're going to get into a little bit later about those. One of the big pieces is that we're so used to just calling the student in that's been accused and get their side and ready to take action against that particular student, the accused. But we have to give due process, and that means, first of all, before we can get into punishing the kid in punitive action against that student, then the formal Title IX process, it may be a 2-day waiting period that we can get representation for that person to have somebody represent them. So everything's is totally different thought process when it comes to discipline. So if we jump the gun and discipline a kid, and then I have a parent say, I want to pursue the formal Title IX investigation process, well, actually, I've violated the accused's due process as well. So it's very critical that we make sure that if you have something that even appears to be potentially sexual harassment, call my office, and we're going to discuss it before we take action.
Okay. All right. So the next thing is kind of going into the scope of Title IX. We talked briefly about what that definition of sexual harassment is. But the other piece of that is kind of a jurisdictional element. So it's going to be sexual harassment that occurs in the district's education program or activity and in the United States. So if the allegations meet both the definitional sexual harassment, we've determined, yes, this conduct on the basis of sex meets one of those 3 categories. And the jurisdictional piece is also met. So it's in one of the education's programs or activity, happened on school campus, happened via school email, something like that. And it's something that's happened in the United States, so not an international program. The allegations must be addressed under the new Title IX procedures. So just to briefly read that definition, because unfortunately it is a federal definition of education program or activity. It includes locations, events, or circumstances over which the district exercises substantial control over both the respondent and the context in which the sexual harassment occurs, and to any building owned or controlled by a student organization that is officially recognized by the district. So for the most part, that's kind of common sense, but sometimes when we're on field trips and things like that, that does get into a confusing area. So anytime those 2 or 3 definitions or requirements are met, we're going to follow the Title IX. We're going to call our Title IX coordinator and go through the Title IX process. Okay. The next really important piece of the new regulations is the reporting requirement. And what's important about that is it applies to all district employees. So everybody that's employed by the district, when you hear of an allegation of sexual harassment, we're going to call the Title IX coordinator. And the important part of that is there's an obligation to respond. And by response, that doesn't always mean we're going to go into this formal grievance process, but that means we have to reach out to our victim, our complainant, and give them supportive measures and make sure that they're being taken care of on both sides. But kind of a duty not to put your head in the sand and ignore whatever conduct might fall under that sexual harassment.
Kate, if I may
Yeah,
add
please
with
do.
that piece. So the critical piece for us is that you have actual knowledge, and so even if the lunchroom person heard it or the custodian heard it, the district is put on notice. So it's like if it was ever came down to a federal investigation or a lawsuit, we were put on notice the moment one of our employees heard it. So it's not one of the things to put to the side and say, I'll get to it. We've got actual knowledge, then we need to start taking action.
Yeah, the big piece of that is it just expands that definition of actual knowledge. Is anytime that anyone hears about it, sees it happen, thinks that there's a chance that it may have happened, and that's when we're going to go into the Title IX process.
And that's hear about it.
Yeah.
Not just what we can prove or
Right.
disprove, but what can we, if we heard it, we're on notice.
Mm-hmm.
Does the student have to complain about it?
No, yeah, that's very important. So there doesn't have to be a complaint from a student that sexual harassment has occurred. So even if just the teacher hears about it, we're going to go through that Title IX. That's going to kick in. Okay, so more about reporting sexual harassment. Any person can report sexual harassment, so that's a parent, a teacher, another student, a field trip monitor, anything like that. They can report sexual harassment, and that once they report it to a district employee or the Title IX coordinator, all of the Title IX stuff comes in, and we're going to go through this process through the Title IX process. So any report can be made in person, by phone, mail, email. So you can report it any way that you can think of to the Title IX coordinator. And then just again, that importance of the definition of actual knowledge being expanded to anyone in the district. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Does that correspond at the same time, do we notify the school SRO? If we know about it, do we notify the SRO at the same time we're notifying you?
Anytime there's an allegation of sexual harassment, I always tell everyone to make sure you notify SRO. Because they may take the lead to some degree for a criminal aspect of it. So definitely notify SRO, definitely notify your administration. But absolutely, most of your administration, but definitely make those notifications. And also, if it's a potential sexual situation we're dealing with, you may have to call DCF as well.
Yeah.
So those are the things I check mark: DCF, SRO, and definitely administration.
Yeah. And the important piece of that is just because DCF or SRO knows about it doesn't mean that the Title IX coordinator also knows about it. So make sure you're reaching out to all of those appropriate people. Okay, so I've mentioned this Title IX grievance process a couple times, and it is complicated, but once we break it down into roles and the different steps, it does become a little bit more clear. So just kind of here we've got our main roles and our words that kind of have a new definition under Title IX. So we've got our complainant, the respondent, Title IX coordinator, Title IX liaisons, your investigator, your decision maker, and then also there's an appeals group that we have.
And just so you all know, we're not expecting you to do a Title IX investigation. We want you to have a broad overview of what Title IX is and what your role is as far as when you can recognize it and then reach out to our office. If there's a formal investigation, I'll be taking over that investigation. It's just so you can recognize what it is, identify it, and take appropriate steps.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so the first role that we have is our complainant. So this is the person who is the alleged victim of the conduct that may constitute sexual harassment. So like I said, our alleged victim. The next one is the respondent or the alleged defendant. So the person who may be the perpetrator of the conduct that may constitute sexual harassment. And then it's important, y'all know this, but parents and guardians have the right to go through with the Title IX formal complaint on behalf of their student. Okay. All right, so the next one is the Title IX coordinator, so the person that's over all of this Title IX materials, which is Mr. Chapman. They have a couple obligations that are listed out in the federal regulations. Those are listed here, but the important piece of that for y'all is to know that this is the person that you reach out to anytime there's an allegation of sexual harassment. And the person that you'll be working with on behalf of the school to deal with any kind of sexual harassment claim. So our Title IX liaisons, which these are our Title IX liaisons, right? Sometimes.
So we're in the process of identifying Title IX liaisons at the school. At this time, they were thinking the thought process was some APs or people that deal with discipline. Hasn't been finally decided, but that was kind of the thought process where it's going. But since most of you already deal with it, we thought it was a good idea to give you an overview. But there'll be more information coming about the Title IX liaisons and also more training and a PowerPoint that goes with that piece once that's identified.
Yeah, so the liaison at each school is going to be the person that's in contact with the Title IX coordinator, kind of the control over the flow of information and contacting that Title IX coordinator anytime we think there's an issue of Title IX sexual harassment. So those are the kind of on the ground people. And then our next kind of role is the Title IX investigator. So pretty common sense, this is the person that's going to be doing the Title IX investigation. They're going to look into those allegations, talk to witnesses, and really do an investigation and determine their report for what they think happened. The next thing is the decision maker. So after we have our Title IX coordinator that's involved, we've gone through the investigation process. The next person that's involved is the decision maker. They're going to say, yes, this is sexual harassment and here's what's going to happen next. Or no, this is not sexual harassment, and deal with that accordingly. Okay, so just an overview of the grievance process. So once a formal Title IX complaint is filed, a parent or student that's when they've written out, this is what happened, here's who was involved, signed it, given it to the Title IX coordinator. They're going to go onto the investigation process. So if all three of those elements are met, it's sexual harassment, it's in the U.S., and it happened on district property or in a district controlled environment, we're going to say, okay, we're going to go on to the next stage, which is investigation. So at this point, we're talking with witnesses and getting both sides of the story. Throughout that investigation process, both the complainant and the respondent are going to be able to look at all of that, all of the evidence. They're going to be able to gather their own evidence, but it's on the burden of the district to go out and do that investigation. So after that's all done, they're going to write a report, and each person is going to be able to respond to that investigative report, and then that'll go on to the decision-making stage. So this is kind of the question and answer. It's written question and answer. We don't do hearings because we're not that college level, but so this is when the decision-making team can ask questions of the complainant and respondent. The complainant and respondent can ask by writing a relevant question to the other party, and to any witnesses, they can also do a question and answer statement kind of process with them. And then after all of that's completed, everybody's had a chance to respond to questions. They'll write a final report, which, tells them of their findings and lets them know the outcome of the case. Okay, and then kind of after that, after the decision has been made as to what are punishment or no punishment, or whether it was even sexual harassment to begin with, there's limited reasons for an appeal. I don't think we need to go into all of that today, but there is an appeal process for certain limited reasons.
And so let me add is that, so this process from start to finish could take about 60 days. And that means it could be 60 days before you can take punitive action or disciplinary action against the accused. So just keep that in mind. It's a process.
Yeah. So with that being said, since this is potentially a long process, there is the opportunity, or really not the opportunity, the requirement to give both parties supportive measures. So at the first hearing of Title IX sexual harassment, we can offer supportive measures. So what that means is non-disciplinary, non-punitive services that are individualized to the situation and the students. And really that's designed to restore their access to the education program or activity. So the important piece of that is that these aren't designed to be punitive to either party. So a lot of times this may just look like putting them in temporarily separate classes or separate places in the lunchroom, those kinds of supportive measures.
Counseling as well.
Yeah. And then another piece of that is the supportive measures are available regardless of whether they decide to go through with filing a formal complaint. So even if they're like, I don't want to, it's not that big of a deal to me, I don't want to go through with this formal complaint, a teacher or admin may still think it's appropriate to separate the two students. So regardless of their decision to go through with a Title IX complaint, they still get supportive measures.
And document the supportive measures. Every time I have a conversation with a parent, I mention supportive measures, and I document that I offered supportive measures, and here's what they said or did not say. And so when you're speaking to the student as well, offer supportive measures, just document that, because we've got to have that on file.
Yeah.
Yes?
Definitely.
Do you have a preferred method of documentation, whether it be communication log, whether it be on written forms or whatever?
As long as it's in written form somewhere that you can pull and have access to and preserve it, I think we're good as long as it's in written form.
Yeah. I think they could also use those Title IX forms that
Yes.
we have. So we have some Title IX forms that.
Which you don't have yet.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
will have.
Yeah. That if you run into a sexual harassment situation, get in touch with Mr. Chapman, because he can kind of guide you through those forms and go through there. Okay. So I mentioned earlier a formal complaint. This is what the complainant or complainant's parents they're going to fill out that says. We have a form for a formal complaint, which y'all will have access to, but it doesn't have to be on this form. Anytime the complainant or parent signs anything saying, this is what happened, and I want you to investigate it, that's considered a formal complaint, but we'll give you the form so you have all of that. The important piece of this is if the definitional and jurisdictional requirements are not met, so those three elements we talked about earlier, the formal complaint must be dismissed. So that means we are not going through with the Title IX sexual harassment. So like I mentioned earlier, if this is a instance that, yes, this meets the definition of sexual harassment, however, it didn't occur in the United States, we've got to dismiss it under Title IX. However, that doesn't mean we're not going to go through it with another school board policy. So even though it doesn't meet the definition of Title IX sexual harassment, it doesn't mean that the conduct is going without being addressed. Okay. Like we talked about earlier with supportive measures, another situation y'all might run into is an emergency removal. And this is when the conduct is going to harm someone. We're going to pull out whichever student and make sure that they're not going to create an emergency situation. So what I did want to note about this is that it has to be an immediate threat to the physical health or safety of any student. So we're not just going to pull somebody out for an emergency removal basis and because of a mental health situation. And you know, that's per the federal rule, but that's what we're working with, is just that physical element to that. Okay. And then I have some more details on like the investigation and decision-making process, but
I think we're good.
okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, so that's kind of a brief overview of Title IX. Like I said earlier, the important takeaways there are that definition of sexual harassment. Anytime you think it's coming under that definition, call your Title IX coordinator. And then the other element of that is making sure that we're not punishing a student before we've gone through the Title IX process. So, yeah, thank y'all for having me and bearing with me.
Don't go far. Okay. So, she's so nice. Thank you, Katie, for being here and for giving us the law and the technical jargon. But here's what I want you guys to know. This is not new. We've been talking about this for how long? 2 years? 2 years. And this year already, I know of 4 situations. It could have been Title IX. And by the time Steve and I found out about it, we had already assigned discipline to the child. So let me ask, if that happens, if I'm a school that I don't call you and run a situation by, and then when we figure out what's happened, and now you offer the parent the option, and they say, yes, I want a Title IX investigation, have we broken a law if we've already issued discipline?
Yes, because we've, first of all, as a matter of fact, the young man or woman, lady who was accused, we did not give them due process. And so technically they could even file a lawsuit because we didn't give that individual due process. So for the district, I mean, really, if it might really push Title IX, it could be very punitive for the entire district.
So basically that could turn into a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. So that's why it is so important when Brian asks or I ask, have you talked to Steve? It is so important that if it is anything sexual, whether you think it's right, wrong, good, bad, you agree with the law, you think the law's dumb, it doesn't matter. If it's anything sexual, and we said this in July, we've said it at a couple principal meetings, yet we still have moments when we're not calling Steve, and that is going to get us, it has not gotten us in trouble yet, we've been fortunate. But you do not, I promise you, you do not want to be that administrator that's sitting across from Mr. Chambers explaining why you did not follow directions, because now we're getting sued for $500,000. You don't want to be that person.
Just briefly, another piece of that is sexual conduct absolutely does come under that definition, but it's also conduct on the basis of sex. So that's gender, transgender issues, which are, increasingly more talked about. So we've got to, anytime we're dealing with a gender issue, that also comes under Title IX. More likely you're going to have this sexual conduct that you'll be dealing with, but
Awesome.
It's important to know there.
Thank you. Any questions you have, because now would be a great time to ask those questions, and if you have it, somebody else probably has it too. Does everybody have Mr. Chapman's phone number? If you have a situation come up and you can't get a hold of Mr. Chapman, call either Brian or me, and we'll get the appropriate people involved. We'll help you. Between the three of us, somebody will make sure you get the answers you need.
And Ms. Lamb, if I may add, so one of the reasons we're going to push out the liaison piece as well is so that you'll have at least an idea of how to proceed initially in the event that you can't reach me, which is very rare occasions, but that you can't reach me or reach somebody, that you at least have an idea of this is what I need to do and here's what I do not need to do. So we're going to be pushing that out. I think we just finalized it yesterday, the PowerPoint, so we're going to push that out hopefully within the next week or so.
Any questions? Okay, we're going to shift gears again. So if you need to stand up and stretch, chit chat, talk, bathroom, little bit of break, and Brian is going to come up and enlighten us and entertain us. Brian, I can't wait. 5 minutes, guys. Thank you so much.
As far as the Title IX thing that Steve and them was going over, we've had several of those this year and several last year. We've had one that was quite recent. And what I'll share with you is that everything they said is correct. You can't remove a victim. Like if a boy touches a girl or a boy, it doesn't matter if it's boy, girl, boy, it doesn't matter. But if a boy touches a girl and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and the bus is loading 20 minutes, if it's Title IX sexual harassment, you can't give discipline, but you've got 30 minutes to find out, and you call Steve, and what if you have to leave a message? What do you tell the boy? You can't tell him to stay home, so he's allowed to come to school tomorrow. So that's when you call my phone, and then I'm going to say, we're going to figure out a way not to have him at school tomorrow. Because I'm not comfortable with that, but that's why I'm saying if you have a situation, call Steve, but also call me, and we'll talk it through. And those situations can be touchy, because on the flip side of that, we do want to give both groups due process. We want to follow rules. But can you imagine the phone calls you're going to get if a boy molests a girl at your school and then the next day that boy's still back on your campus? I mean, are you going to get 2 or 3 phone calls or 200 or 300? So the timing of this, if it's a Title IX sexual harassment, even if it's a potential one, it may not be, the timing of it is extremely important. So as soon as you get notification, call immediately. It don't, a cell phone or a tardy, you may put that on your desk and deal with it later. This is not something I'd kick down the road. Even if you don't have all the details, you call and go, hey, I don't have everything, but this is what I do know. And I'm calling you now, and I'll go get everything. But let's at least get those conversations and get him on the phone. And then Kate, I've seen where Mr. Chapman wasn't available, and I called Kate, and she helped me walk me through one and sent me the forms. So timing is what I would say. Don't waste your time on this. If you start getting word of it, act immediately, and let's make a decision pretty quick, because by rule, that boy would be allowed to come back. And we've not had that happen yet in 2 years. And we'll try to keep the streak going if that's what it is. Okay. So there's a couple of things that I'm going to go over, and since the discipline meeting.
Just as a clarification, you guys, so it does not mean we can necessarily send that kid home. But what you could do, again, manage your message. What you could do is explain to the parent of the accused, there's been an allegation against Brian that he blah, 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 blah. Can you tell them the allegation? Or can you just say there's been an allegation?
Yeah, you can tell them. I would, like you said, monitor your message, but
that there's an allegation and there could be a Title IX investigation pending for his protection or her protection to ensure there's no further accusations. We're going to, it might be he goes to, or she goes to STP. We're not coding it as STP, okay? He gets or she gets, I keep saying he, I'm sorry, that is very sexist of me. She gets all of her work. Teachers are making sure they have what they need. We're making sure they're getting their education, but we're protecting the accused. Are you with me? You understand what I'm saying?
It's not a punitive, it's
correct. It's just, this is what we need to do to make sure everybody's safe and nothing further comes out of, or happens.
So that can be considered like a proactive supportive measure. But again, it's how you manage that message with the parents.
As a proactive supportive measure, we would like to.
And also keep in mind, like while I leave this, that Mr. Humphrey and I, we have a lot of discussions, as you can tell. And here's the thing: is that if there's other policies that you may can send a kid home on that did other things, we can send them home on that while we're still processing the Title IX issue as a separate issue. So if there's other things, you can still use other policies to discipline that kid as well. That makes sense?
That's a big deal for you guys. So the kid goes up and harasses a transgender kid and pushes them or hits them or something like that. You can act on the action. Still talk to Steve about the sexual harassment part, but you can act on the action of hitting or shoving or whatever that was.
just really quick, the important piece of that is the discipline can't be more because it was a sexual harassment issue. So the punishment has to be the same as you would do for any other situation that didn't involve sexual harassment.
Would it be better to separate both of them then? You're doing one discipline for the pushing or shoving, and then you do the sexual harassment?
So here's what I always tell folks is, you can send somebody home for the pushing, right? So you're sending them home, you're saying there's this, for 3 days, whatever you decide that is, 2 days a day. And then until further notice, there could, always let the parent know, there could be further discipline. Because if you say it's 1 day or 2 days or 3 days and then you're done, and that's not really what you're thinking in the long run, always there could be further discipline. Right now, he needs to go home for this action.
Yeah, so I can think of scenarios where you're not going to want the kid back on campus, but then I can think of some where it might be a little bit more minor in that the kid could be on campus and you could separate them. But that's why we need to have that discussion. But really what it's going to boil down to is just really make sure this is on the forefront. As soon as something comes to you, immediately act. And a lot of you do call me and you don't have all the info. That's when you should be calling. Other discipline incidences, you could call the next day and tell me, oh, yesterday this happened. But if it's Title IX sexual harassment, we shouldn't be having the conversation where you call me and go, 2 days ago this happened. And I'm thinking, I didn't get a call 2 days ago? So just know that it's that important that you act immediately and we get all of the things going. Because otherwise we could find ourselves in a predicament where we've got both people have rights and we've got somebody on your campus that we'd rather not have, all right? So just act immediately, okay? So what my plan is to go over some things that are in the handout, and so we're going to try to address like vaping, alcohol, how to alternatively place students, behavior contracts, things like that. And you know, earlier when Ms. Lamb was talking and she was talking about your vision and nobody raised their hand except for Mr. Schroeder, that was a little discerning, just because if you're going to do discipline, especially if you're new to discipline, you kind of need to have a vision or a philosophy or a stance, and then you need to share it at your school. Like if somebody goes to your school and they ask your teacher, the teachers at your school, hey, how's the discipline here? They all should be saying the same thing. And I never like to talk about a principal or as an example or anything that's working, but I know one that's retired from Crestview. I don't know if y'all all met Mr. Day, but if you ever met Mr. Day, you know his discipline stance, whether you wanted to hear it or not. He would let you know, and all of his teachers know his stance. All of his students know his stance. And if you ever went to Crestview, like in Walmart, and talked about Mr. Day, they would all talk about his discipline stance. Because when Mr. Day talked about discipline, he was intense about it. And I'm not saying everybody needs to have like blood vessels popping out of their forehead and yelling at people, but I can remember meeting in here about 6 or 7 years ago when that discipline matrix was being made and all the principals were in a circle and they were asking about fighting. What are we going to do with fighting? And they went around and Dexter was last. And when it came his turn, he almost started throwing chairs. He was like, I'm not tolerating fighting. 2 fights, you're gone. And everybody was like, you're going to all place for 2 fights? But now every school does that. Yeah. But at the time, no one had heard of that. We were all tolerating it, but his stance was he's not going to tolerate it, and that was his message. And so he was real good at discipline, and I can talk about him because he's not working anymore. But he was real good at discipline, but it's because he had a vision and he had a philosophy, and he shared it at faculty meetings. He would plug it for a few minutes. He would plug it in the hallways. But at the same time, the other things that Tracy and Marcus and Sheila have talked about is you've got to have balance. What a lot of people don't know is Dexter was super nice and loved kids, and he was a hugger. And I've seen him in parent conference meetings about discipline, and I'm looking, and I don't know if he's going to reach across the table and hug that family or headbutt them. You never knew, because he loved people, but he was very firm with his discipline, and that's how you have to have that balance. And so if somebody was to ask, if you're going to do discipline, and that's what your job is, that's what you're hired to do, and someone asks you what's your discipline vision, and and you don't know, I kind of cringe a little bit. You should be developing a vision.
Well,
Yeah, your school should be.
yeah, and just to piggyback on that a little
Well-
bit, like Miss Ard said, relationship-wise is key. So even though Mr. Day would send them home, suspend them, he'd fuss at them a little bit, those kids loved him. I made it my mission when I did discipline that if they didn't walk out thanking me for whatever consequence I gave them, even if it was out of school suspension, then my conversation did not go as it should have. Because in the end, I wanted to make sure they knew this is happening because of choices you made, and this is what I gotta do, but I'm gonna help you get better. Thank you, Miss Lamb. Like, you gotta approach it from the, we care about you and want you to be the best you can be, but the bottom line is we're not gonna tolerate it.
Yeah. And so if you're handling discipline, one of the best compliments you'll get on your campus is if your teachers are saying, yeah, they support us in the classroom. And that's what you need to make sure is happening. If you have a tough vision on discipline, it's appreciated by a lot of people. And you have to take those bullets and you have to have those tough parent conversations. But to my last point to having a vision or a philosophy is you also have to own your vision. And I'll say that only because at least once a month, this last month it happened 3 times, where a parent has called me, because when they get mad at you, they're going to call somebody. Well, that number that they get usually lands with me. And I understand that when parents call and they're angry, not everything coming out of their mouth's the truth. All right. I'll still listen to them. But this last month I've had 3 phone calls, and one phone call was with a mom, and the mom said, my daughter got suspended 5 days, and the administrator at the school said they didn't want to suspend my daughter. They said, my daughter's a good kid, and they didn't want to suspend him. They said, you're doing it, and I need to call you, and you can overturn it. And I was like, man. So what I'm saying, if you're new, don't have those conversations. If you're the discipline person you're giving, you have to own it. Don't say the district. Don't put it on me. And then when you have those meetings, you need to use the word I or we. Like when I talk to them, I say we are going to do this, meaning me and you. Or I'll say I'm going to do it. But you never just put it off. And I've had 3 of those calls this month. And they happen periodically, and it's usually from newer people. So just know that when you have a parent conference, just prep yourself and you're going to own it. That kid did this. You say, I did the interview. I got the statements. Your kid admitted it. This is what you're getting. And if you run all those statements by them and you've run them by me, when they call me, I'm backing you every time. So just get your discipline and own it. Don't ever kind of pawn it off, and don't be wishy-washy, because that's not good. All right. So there's a couple of handouts, and we'll go through them. And the first one that's the most important and I want to make sure is done is the alt placement piece. And we went over this in August. And the early reinstatement piece is new. We've been working on that for a long time. It seems like years. And then as we've rolled it out this year, we've seen some things that don't work as good, and then we've got better information, and we've made some adjustments. So I really want to make sure we go over this form, and I'm not sure how long it's going to take me, so we're going to do this first. And when we do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you, because I've had a bunch of these meetings, and I'm sure some of y'all may not have had any yet, or you may have only had 1 or 2, but I'll share with you how the conversation goes with me and the parent. And you can take note, and hopefully we're all saying the same thing. We're all giving the same message. And that's why I'm going to go over it like I'm having a meeting with a parent, so that when you have a meeting with a parent, you can do the same and explain it kind of the same way and make sure we're all saying the same thing so they don't get misinformation. All right? Because, we've had people apply to come back already this semester. And I know there was when we first was discussing this, there was people calling me going, man, we're going to have all them kids back? And I was thinking, no, you're not having all. So this semester, we've had 3 kids return. So that's 3 kids that met the criteria and were able to return early. So I'm hoping that number goes up a little bit more, but I don't see it going up a lot more than 3. It might go to 10. But it's not going to be hundreds. So the the incentive for the early return to me is working. The feedback that I've got from the academy is they're sharing it with their students on campus, and they have a lot of students who are trying to meet that 90-day thing. They say their discipline on campus is greatly improved because we've added some incentive for them. Okay, so to me, it's a great thing that we're doing. We rolled it out, and as we rolled it out, it didn't work. You know, not everything worked as smooth, so that's why there's been some changes. So I'm going to go over this handout that Miss Manchester wrote with some color-coded stuff on it, and if you'll get that out, we'll go over that. And then when we leave here, she'll email you this updated copy, so everything that's in this packet that you have on your computer, delete it, because it's old. And on some forms, only a word or two has changed, but that word or two is important. So make sure you delete all previous copies and then keep the one she emails you today, okay? So the first page on this is the alternative placement referral form. There hasn't been much change on this, but there's some information that's on here that doesn't always get filled out, but it's extremely important. It's not like a little bit important. It's like if you don't fill it out, you're slowing down the process. Because to alt place people, just like they were talking about earlier with MTSS strategies, mental health counselors, there's a lot of people in the district that weren't in place in the district 10 and 20 years ago to help with discipline. And so we have put other departments in our discipline procedure. They have to be included. Otherwise, the alt placement ain't going to happen. All right. So on this form, you'll put the student's name, and then the first thing on there is you need to determine whether the student's ESE or 504. All right. So you can't date this paperwork if they're ESE or 504 until you've dated the manifestation meeting. The paperwork can't match, and I don't know if any of y'all have missed the date thing. Miss Manchester will email it back to you and tell you to redo it, because this paperwork has to be dated after the manifestation meeting or on the same day.
So,
Okay.
So the decision to alt place cannot be predetermined or made before the manifestation meeting. And I don't know how much clearer to make that, because if you're doing that, you are breaking IDEA. So you may think you're going that direction, and that's what you're going to propose to the IEP team or the 504 team, but it's not just the administrator's decision. That is, the team has questions that are required by IDEA that have to be answered. And those answers determine whether or not we are permitted to alt place a student. And I know there's been some frustrations lately because some of the itinerants in the district have said either, no, we did not provide the services we were supposed to, and not necessarily meaning the itinerant, but as a educational unit, or that they do believe that it's a manifestation of the child's disability. And so as a IEP team, it's not a vote, but the majority of the IEP team is going to determine how those questions are answered. And the bottom line is if we have not ensured all services are being met, if it is in fact related to their disability, we can't alt place. But I'm going to go one step further and say, if we've not done something to try to help this kid, and it's not just a major instant you're alt placed because of what it was so bad whatever you did, because sometimes that happens, right? Or it's an expulsion because it's a zero tolerance policy per school board policy. But if it's you've been on a behavior agreement and now you're at that third strike, and you think you're going to alt place and you've done nothing, there's been no MTSS, there's been no referral to the mental health counselor, there's not a behavior PMP in place, you are not at a point where you are able to alt place at that point because you haven't done your part in trying to help the kid. We haven't done the problem solving process that's required.
Ms. Lamb, as far as the MTSS process is concerned, we like to say, we'll refer them to MTSS if we think the next one may get them on a behavior expectation agreement. What is the district's stance on when it needs to happen and when it should?
So I will say on the behavior agreement, I don't know if we have one here. I think it says on the first strike, you refer to MTSS. I'm just going to tell you, once you've done discipline for a while, and people who are new, you may not have figured this out yet, but typically you know which kids are going to start getting strikes and which kids you just need to put the fear of Jesus into, right? Because some kids, you'll put them on an agreement and you never see them again because they don't want to go there. But you know those who truly have difficulty doing what they need to do. I would say as soon as you realize you have one of those that you have not been able to help, that you have not been able to curtail, that's when you bring that team together to say, okay, what can we do? How are we going to help this kid? That's MTSS.
Or IEP team, it's time for an amendment. Look at their behavior plan, what needs to change. I mean, that behavior plan should have some alteration to it. Something should change before they get alternate place. It shouldn't be the plan that's been in place for 3 years, same thing, and now we're sending them somewhere else and we didn't do anything different.
So if I'm a language impaired kid, so don't think they just have to be EBD. If I'm a language impaired kid or I'm SLD and I'm getting ready to you're thinking you're going to outplace me, it still has to go to manifestation. And if you have not met and had an interim long before you're at that third strike, shame on you, because you should get the IEP team together with the parent to say, I think we need to look at a behavior goal. Because he's now, or she, I keep saying he, Brian, I'm so sorry, but she is just naughty and she is struggling. We've got to figure out how to help her. So I think I would like to propose we need to add a behavior goal. And how are we going to help this kid?
And Tracy also mentioned you've got a speech with ADHD or whatever. If you know about it, you've done nothing to address that. That's the same thing.
Yes. So let's just say it's a speech only kid, but they have ADHD. But their eligibility is not OHI. But we've documented and we know they have ADHD. Again, that becomes part of the conversation at the manifestation. So it's just all about making sure when you have a kid that's having a hard time doing what they're supposed to do, you want to make sure you're meeting with the right people to ensure you have done all that you could possibly do so that nobody sitting around that manifestation table is going to say, we didn't do what we were supposed to do. Because I can't tell itinerants what to say at those meetings. I think some people think I can say, yeah, you can't go against the principal or the assistant principal. I can't predetermine what's going to be said at those meetings. That's illegal.
What if you have a language student only? It's happening right now. And the parent's like, he's ADHD. So can I advise to talk to the staffing specialist to get the OHI paperwork started on that so we can provide the correct support?
Yeah, so as soon as a parent tells you even verbally that they have ADHD, that kind of notifies us that we need to do something. So since the child already has an IEP, we're going to address that through an IEP. If they didn't have an IEP, that would be an immediate 504. So since it already has an IEP, we would not have a 504 in addition, but we would have to add some strategies. With a medical diagnosis, we might go ahead and look at adding an eligibility for OHI. Okay. But yeah, we can put accommodation, just like we put social workers on an IEP.
Yep.
We would attend to ADHD on that IEP.
She's on my voicemail. I just have to call her back.
But I want to say this, the number, if you guys were able to look at the academy, the number of kids that are alt placed, the majority of them are SLD or language. The majority of them. Okay? Well, why do you think that is? They struggle in school, have struggled all along, so now their behaviors are coming out. So I know when I was a principal, I did what you just did. Well, they're just SLD. Wrong. Wrong. That you can put, that IEP team can meet. You don't need an OHI designation. It doesn't matter. You can put something in their IEP. They're already an ESC student. You can put something in their IEP, goals or accommodations for their hyperactivity, right? Whether that's documented or not, because it could be part of their behavior just because they're struggling with language.
Right, and nothing in previous IEPs stated anything ADHD ever.
Right,
And
but a
so-
lot of times kids with language or SLD are ADHD, they just never got the diagnosis because the parents don't want them on meds. I mean, so there's lots of complications when you start bringing up ADHD, but you can still put things in their IEP to support that.
Yeah.
Right, okay? But please keep that in mind, because when I look at the data, and I know, you guys, I walked in your shoes, I get where you're at. I was an AP at Choctaw, I was a principal at Shalimar. I understand. I was a teacher for 20-something years. So I haven't forgotten those things. And I understand the frustration that some kids can give us, but that's why we're so intense on what are we doing different. We can't do what we did 20 years ago. It's not working. So we have to look at these things. And when I look at the data for the academy, or the number of kids we've outplaced, and the majority of them are ESE, and then the state comes down and says our discipline rate on ESE students, male ESE students, is too high, it's well above the state, and you got to do something about it, that comes down to you, right? And your principal, and how we act at the school. So we've got to put things in place. We need to think about those SLD kids and language kids differently than we have. Because I used to have that. Well, they're just SLD. They can do this. No, wrong. They need supports. Okay? So I know that's my little soapbox, but that's something that has been really, as I sit here at my seat and see the big picture, has really taken a hold that we have to do something different, and especially for those kids, because they're struggling. So they're sitting in the back. We put them, when they get to middle school, they go into regular classes. Now they're all together, and what are the behaviors in those classes? We wonder, right? Not real good. So, but they're struggling students. So unless we put additional supports or a different way of teaching to engage them, which is what we work on the curriculum side, is how can we engage them more so that they're not bored or they're not able to access the material. Those are the things that make behaviors happen. So, okay, stop it.
So we can outplace ESE and 504. We just have to make sure we've done our part. So don't hear anybody saying you can't. We can, but we got to make sure we've done our part.
Okay, so on this ESE part, there's a couple of things as a disciplinary you got to look. So if you know you're going to outplace, you got the kid's name, you want to pull up his 702 screen, which it won't be that way in focus anymore, because I imagine I'll have a different number. But what you'll want to look for is, are the ESE or 504, and then you'll want to schedule this. But there's another thing that you're going to look for, because by board policy, some offenses, it says that the first step is to suspend the kid for 10 days and then recommend this. Well, you have to recognize that an ESE kid cannot be suspended more than 9 without the manifestation. So they may have had 3 previous suspension dates, and you can only give them 6 more before the manifestation. So you would need to check how many suspension dates that student's had already this year, and can you give him the full 10 or 9? And then you can call your staffing specialist and say, hey, are you going to be here on Wednesday? And today's Monday. You say, hey, you're going to be here Wednesday so that we can do a manifestation meeting? And if they say yes, then you know you only need to suspend the kid 3 days. So if it's by board policy that says you have to do the 10 days, you would, for an ESE kid, you can only go up to 9, and that's what you would do. But if it's a alternative placement situation where you're violating their behavior agreement in their ESE, there's no requirement that you put 10 days in or 9. Put the number of days you need to make it happen, but give the parent a day to make their decision. So I've seen where it's an ESE kid, they get suspended 10 days, they violated a behavior agreement, and the manifestation meeting has been pushed out for 2 weeks. And the manifestation meeting needs to happen for you to go over 9. So you need to juggle out of school suspension dates, and then the manifestation meeting has to address can you alt place? All right.
So days of STP count also. So it's not just days of OSS.
And so do bus suspensions if the child can't get to school. So if you suspend from the bus and mom still brings them, you don't count them. But if you suspend from the bus and they don't come, that also counts. So you have to be very careful with those days. And as we've talked about, sometimes you have manifestation meetings. This happened with me with some of my students with emotional behavior disabilities. You know, you have those manifestation meetings and it is a manifestation of their behavior. So they're not going anywhere, they're staying with you, and now you've used up all their 10 days, and now every time you suspend them, for, you know, anytime they've done some bad act, you're having another manifestation meeting weekly. So like Brian's saying, you don't have to go that whole route. And remember, your staffing specialists are shared between multiple schools. We're still down to staffing specialists, and this is a lot of work for them to pull a manifestation meeting together. So as soon as you think you're getting close to something like this, please reach out immediately to them, so you can kind of get on their schedule and they can let you know what their schedule is for this to happen too. But yeah, so out of school, in school, and bus suspension days all count towards those days towards a manifestation.
So ESE is complicated. Would you guys like for us to put together kind of a cheat sheet? Yes. With like important number of day, all that good stuff? Okay, we'll do that for you guys.
And a neat piece of focus, what we're going to, so all students are going to have some kind of color coding with them when we start. So when you go like your pause screen and you pull up a student's name, they're going to have, I don't know, if they were showing us yesterday, it was like a little person, but it's not going to be a person, but like a color dot or something. So that child's name is going to have a color, and it might be red, and red would be like your immediate notice is, hey, this kid's got a red dot, they're ESE. They've got a blue dot, they've got a 504. So that's going to trigger you immediately to know, whoa, this one I've got to slow down and take some different steps with.
Can you clarify something for me? Sorry. So with the STP, if that student receives services that day, does that count as part of that day? Like, so if our SLD teacher goes in and pulls Sally to do her group, does that count as one of those 10?
So that's kind of one of those gray areas. So if they are still receiving instruction, if their class teacher has truly provided their work for them to do and someone is there to help them and they are still getting their ESE services, then we have done that before, yes.
However, keep in mind when the state pulls our data, STP, bus suspensions, and out-of-school suspensions, they see as all one thing. They don't see those as separate things. So maybe
That might
in
be
the
a
10
coding.
days we
That
can
might be a
speed
coding.
it a
You
little
might
up.
code that differently that day.
You're right, but it might be timeout. Listen, elementary,
Yeah.
timeout is different.
Yeah,
Timeout is different. It's not STP.
absolutely. I mean, if you know that you're going to be able to provide that kind of situation for that kid while they're in STP, that they're going to go to the resource classroom, they are going to have instruction, and that STP monitor can provide that help with them, and they'll get their accommodations, then I would code it as a timeout.
I got a mic. You can give that to Tracy. So on the ESE suspension, you got a question?
Yeah, just hopefully it never gets to that point, but what if the 9 days already gets done?
All right, let's talk about the days, because a lot of times when people call, I'll run this through and there's a million different scenarios. Like, let's say it's alcohol. By board policy, we have to give them 10. You can give them 9 and tell them additional discipline's coming, and then after the manifestation, give them that other day, because we want to follow board policy. If it says give them 10, we're going to get them to 10. You can go over 9, you just have to have a manifestation meeting to do it. So the manifestation meeting has to be scheduled before you get to the 10th. So anytime board policy says 10, we do in 10. But now on a behavior contract violation, there's no policy that says you have to do 10 before you alt place. So if you put 10 in and the kid chooses online and he's in online school in 2 days, we're not going back and taking the 10 days out. Those 10 days are counted towards your school. So why would we over-report OSS days when we don't have to? So when someone pulls your data, like Ms. Lightbourne's talking, you don't want to be like the leading out-of-school suspension school in the state of Florida. And everybody will go like, how come we're winning that? You know, and it's because you're popping them with 10 every time, and that kid's already been in school. So only suspend on those scenarios as many days as you need, but let them know that we're going to try to do it in 3 days, but additional discipline may come if we don't get it done in 3 days, because I'll give you an extra day. But you always have to just leave the door open that additional days may be added. You have to let them know.
Sorry, let me say something else. So, and I know this happens in elementary, I'm not sure about secondary as much, but if a child is misbehaving and you go, you know what, they just don't need to go back to class today, so I'm gonna put them in STP. No, you're not. You're gonna put them in timeout, because STP should be full day, okay? So how you're coding things is important. You know, I know that sounds crazy, but when the state starts pulling that, and they do, it looks like you're putting kids, they might only spend 2 hours in there. Well, they weren't in STP, they were in timeout. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're coding things.
And think about that with middle school, because there was something with an ESE child the other day with the manifestation, and they had so many suspensions, but there was one class, it had been coded, the child had been suspended from a certain class like 13 times. So truly, it was way over those numbers. So think about that also. Are you suspending them from the class, or were they in timeout from the class? But just those numbers, we would have to go with that 13 times. So
there's all kinds of scenarios, so we will put together a TAP. If you have a specific scenario you would like for us to kind of address in that technical assistance, email that to Ms. Ard, and we'll make sure we include that.
So when we're addressing the discipline on an alt-place kid and you get to this ESE thing, if you leave it blank and send it in, we don't know that those questions have all been answered. Did you get to 9 days? Did you give them 3 days? And then is the manifestation meeting scheduled? So if we get the form that's blank, Ms. Manchester will end up emailing you back, and then she'll be like, hey, you left this part out. Could you fill this out and send it back? And then that just delays the thing. It only takes a couple of seconds on your end to double check those. So just know you're going to check, don't go over 9 days for an ESE kid, and then, you know, make sure we have a manifestation meeting scheduled. And if your staffing specialist is out, you know, we've had some situations this year where I called somebody and they said, well, our staffing specialist won't be back for 2 weeks. And so Miss Ard borrowed one and sent them there. So we're never going to push it out that far. We want all this to happen in a couple of days. So hopefully, if your staffing specialist can't make it happen, you can call me or Miss Ard, and we'll get somebody there and make that happen.
But not the day of and not the day before. We do have to plan ahead a little bit,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna just clarify. We should not be sending alt placement paperwork out before the manifestation. That's why it says the date of the manifestation, because we're predetermining, and we cannot predetermine.
All right, and then so below that is the section for, is there an MTSS referral, mental health counselor, has the mental health counselor referral been done and the threat assessment been done? So MTSS we'll discuss in a minute when we get into the behavior agreement. MTSS is going to involve your guidance counselor. The mental health counselor also would be involved, and unless it's zero tolerance, we are going to require that they've been involved and done a screening. If these steps haven't been done where the guidance counselor is involved in MTSS and the mental health counselor is not involved, and then if there's a threat, which we'll go over in a few minutes, if the threat assessment team didn't address it, all of those things have to be happening for you to follow the right procedure. So I know some of you people have done discipline for a long time, like Mark will call often and he'll read off, we did MTSS on this date, this date, this date, then he'll do mental health referral this date, and then he tells me what the kid did. He goes ahead and explains what Ruckel has done for these students over and over, and that shows me he's followed the procedure, and then he gets to his question. So these things involve other departments. You know, usually discipline would never talk to guidance counselors and discipline would never call mental health counselors, but because bringing all these into our procedures for discipline, you're going to have to. Otherwise, it's going to hold up the alt placement. So if it's a behavior contract violation where you're giving a kid 3 strikes and you're removing him because of the behavior at your school, all of these steps would need to be followed. And we'll go over that in a few minutes when we go over violating the behavior agreement. So the section where it says, has the mental health referral been done? By law, we have to do a mental health referral. I need to know, did you do it? Because if you didn't do it, then I need to do it. So if that's not filled out, I'll end up having to call, or Miss Manchester will call and go, hey, did y'all do a referral? And if you go no, because the kid was gone or whatever, you weren't able to do it, by law it has to be done. So I have to pick it up and make sure it's done. But if you'll just check it, if you did it, yes or no, that lets me know what I need to do. Okay? Then below that, there's an AB for the reasoning for. There's 2 reasons marked on here. You can alternatively place somebody for multiple violations of the student code of conduct or a serious violation. We like to say that if somebody has multiple referrals at your school, and that could be a different number at every school, it might be 10 at your school and 20 at another, but at some point you can put someone on a behavior agreement, and then after multiple offenses, and we would like to say that those offenses for strikes would warrant an out-of-school suspension or a day of STP. If it doesn't warrant that, it's probably not worthy of a strike, so we would call those other items more petty. And even though they require discipline, we would not give that kid a strike. So serious.
Say something there is, guys, secondary people, you cannot, you put a kid, and I've seen this, and it makes my head spin off my shoulders. So you put a kid on a behavior contract this morning, and by the afternoon, you gave them 3 strikes. Wrong. What did you put in place in between to correct the behaviors? You put him on a behavior contract this morning. You think he's in a good mood? You think he's going to go back to class and be the perfect student? No. So maybe the mental health counselor or a guidance counselor. You know, guidance counselors do guidance. They do more than people. Although they don't get a chance to do that too often, but I know they want to. Talk through those things. Do not alt place because you got 3 strikes on it, unless they're hideous and things have serious infractions happen. But when I see you put them on a behavior plan because of tardies, and then they had their cell phone out, and then they were disrespectful, so that was the bottom line. So we're just going to alt place them today. That's not flying, and Brian's not going to let it happen because he knows my stance. So my vision is not that, okay? So if that's the mindset you have, we need to start rethinking, because that's not going to work, okay?
And actually on that, if you're coding something, a kid could actually do 5 things in one day, but the proper way of coding that is take the most severe incident and give him credit for that and put notes behind it on the other 4. But you don't want to pop him with 5 things just to make a list, but we always would document the most severe incident. That's proper procedure for all coding for discipline infractions. So we would not want to do 5 things in one day anyway. The kid did one major thing and put the notes for the rest. All right, so when you're meeting with a parent, they'll have to sign this form. I went over the parts that we really need to make sure that we fill out, but this is a referral form. This form is required when you're outside the controlled open enrollment window for the kid to leave your school and go to an alternative setting. This gives that school permission to enroll you and sends the FTE to that school. So if they go to Okaloosa Online or the Academy, that's what this form's for. So when you meet with parents, what's important to point out to them is there's a section on here that says the reason for the alt placement. The rest of it, you don't have to go over it with them and have them sign it. So what I'll meet with them is I'll say, so the first form I need to share with you, and I'll give you a copy of all these forms before we leave, is it says right here, possession of a THC pen. And I'll say, is that correct? and have them verify it and make sure that they'll say yes. If they say no, you'll go, so why? So you're saying no, are you disputing this? And then you listen to them. Then obviously you've done your homework as a disciplinarian, and you've got student statements, you've got either video statement, you've got adult statements. So you have evidence, and it's probably been tested by the SRO, and you share this with the parent. You go, well, ma'am, the SRO said they tested positive. I got 3 statements here. This is my stance, and this is the discipline that you're getting, and this is the reason why. They may not have to agree with it, but at that point, you'll offer them to sign it. They don't have to sign it. They can refuse to sign it. If they refuse to sign it, you'll just say, well, ma'am, I'll give you a copy of it without your signature. That's fine, but you let them know the discipline's going forward. Just because you aren't signing it don't mean we're stopping. I've told you my stance, and I'm owning my stance, and I'm having this meeting to help answer questions for you. So if we're having this meeting, we've already got to the point we've all been in agreement this event did happen, and we have overwhelming evidence that it happened, and the kids getting all placed. Sometimes we have schools that if the parent refuses to sign it or they won't come in and sign it, they'll stop and not file the paperwork and not code it as an alt placement. And what I will tell you is if the parent refuses or don't show up, you still push the paperwork through. You just write on there, parent refused to come in. And you send it in and you put the code in AS400. And that's because we have students all the time trying to come back 2 months later at another school. And they look in there and it's not documented. And then when we call the other school, we say, hey, didn't y'all alt place that kid? And they go, well, they wouldn't come in, so we didn't do it. Well, what I'm saying is we're going to offer the opportunity for the parent to be a part of it, but if they refuse, we're still going with it. Okay, so just make sure that this form is the form that will notify them what they did. This is the reason you're being alt placed. I'd like you to sign here. All right. And then
what's our obligation if they refuse to be part and they're not agreeing? What's our obligation as a school to ensure they do enroll either somewhere else or online? Like, where does truancy fall into?
all right, so if you're under the age of 16, you know, they're obligated by law to be enrolled somewhere. We'll monitor them for a few days. Usually Patrick or Ron will monitor them for a couple of days, and then we'll make a phone call and nudge them. And then we've actually gone out to houses and knocked on doors and handed them the copy of the paperwork. So we'll push it for the kids under 16. Over 16, we can suspend their driver's license. But, you know, once you're over 16, they can go GED. AMI still offers GED classes in Fort Walton. You know, there's a lot of options for them. You know, we can push that a little bit. There's a board policy that says if the parent refuses to sign, you could bump it up to an expulsion. But I wouldn't be, that's almost like they're mad and you're just going to make them madder. I don't know what but that's there. If the kid was like a serious threat to school, we might look at it, but I wouldn't do it for the typical.
So once they've pushed the paperwork to you, your office then will track to make sure they've enrolled.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on them, especially if they're under the age of 16, and we'll make sure they're enrolled. And
See, I usually track that also.
Okay.
But what happens sometimes is the smart parents know if they withdraw the student, then unfortunately the law says you have to withdraw them out of the computer, so we can't track them. But if they don't know that and they just get mad and they leave, then I hold on to it. And at about the 10th day, I give it to a truancy officer. And I say, please track this kid. He's not enrolled anywhere, and we're just trying to make sure that either his license is suspended or you're following up with the magistrate.
Thank you for doing that. That helps the schools tremendously.
so the second page of this document has some check boxes. So I'll always share with the parent that I'll say I'm gonna go over these boxes, and then these boxes outline how your child can return and get through this discipline process and come back to school. All right, and then I'll share with them that the definition for their discipline consequence is an alt placement, and that's for the rest of this semester plus next semester. So these boxes are how to return on the normal time frame, not the early reinstatement, but this is for the normal time frame.
Can we get this in Spanish?
So It is in Spanish. Yeah, so if you email, yeah. So this form, you'll share with the parent that you, like if you're getting alt placed today, I'd say, so ma'am, your son's going to be out the rest of this semester plus all of next semester. Your son will be back at school in August. That's going to be their date. All right, but this is how you return. And I'll say, the first line says, I'll have academic progress. It used to say I'll pass all my classes, but we changed that because, you know, they can't pass all their classes. So we made it where you just got to have academic momentum, and if they're doing something, that means they have to enroll. So I'll look the mom in the eye and I'll say, Mom, that means if you leave this meeting and you don't enroll and you call me in a couple of months, your kid's not getting back in school. We're going to extend it. And I'll look at Mom and I'll say, so Mom, it's important that when you leave this meeting, in the next day or two, I need him enrolled. And that kind of nudges them in that direction, lets them know we're going to hold them to they got to enroll somewhere. And then the rest of them are like, they have to have good daily attendance. You know, in our district, for most kids, attendance 9 days in a semester where they can write a parent note. Anything after that, we kind of think is excessive. But to me, 9 days is a lot. You probably got kids at your school that don't even miss 9 days in a year. So to me, I always share with them the line that I look at is 9 days a semester. That's 18 days a year. And to me, that seems like they should be under that. And then the other is minimal discipline referrals. So we have schools that when a kid's coming back from the academy, you know, if they choose online, there's no discipline referrals to look at because nobody's writing them up at home. But if they choose the academy, there's principals that are real good on the computer and they're doing backup checks. Say, oh, this kid's coming to me, and they get on the computer and start looking up stuff, and they go, Brian, this kid had 11 referrals last year. And I said, well, the year before he had 31, so he's doing better this year than he did the year before. So if I can assure you, if a kid if he's coming back to you, we've already vetted him. We've already checked all these things. I would never send a kid back to your school. I'd like to send them back perfect, but when they left your school, they wasn't perfect. We'll check on all the things that we think is important, and which is another note I got is we always keep kids out of your school that have gun charges, active gun charges. You've never seen one come to your school. You can think about it, you ain't seen one. Or a sex charge, lewd and lascivious, you're not going to see them because we vet those. The only ones that we send back to you that is the ones that we feel like have no discipline sanctions through the court, and they're trying to do better at school, and they're not perfect. So when they are coming back, if you see this form and they're coming back, you can go do your own CSI thing and call me, but we'll just have to argue a little bit. But the kid's coming back.
Remember, they had a sentence, they completed the sentence. Like, they're not permanently sent to the academy.
Right, so this is the return.
Needs to grasp that when you get them out for a period of time, but they're likely coming back to you if that period of time, if they're not an 8th grader and they're not.
That's right. And that's what these boxes are, is they're coming back. Yeah.
You got to develop a different mentality. You want it back.
That's right. They're your kids. They're our kids. This is how they come back, and my office vets these boxes when they're coming to return. And so you'll get some, and I know how y'all are thinking, man, if they could just be gone one more semester, but no, they're coming back, okay? And, you know, unless you see something I don't see, I mean, you're welcome to call. I'm not offended when you check, but just know that we spend hours checking on these things every day.
Well, and think about, what does your conversation sound like when they come back? Because Brian is exactly right. You got to have the right mentality and fake it till you make it. So you may really, your stomach might turn upside down and you might be thinking, oh, here we go. But you can't let that show. Brian, it is so good to see you back. Man, come on, come talk to me. Tell me how things are going. How's it going to be different? What do you need from me? I'm going to check in on you every other day for a little bit. Just give you that pep talk every morning. It's getting those kids to buy into being glad to be back and feeling welcomed, because if they feel like you don't want them there, that's not going to help them buy into what you need them to do. And that's not what's best for kids.
So when you're going through these boxes, you'll have the parent initial, the student initial, and you read each box to them. And I'll go over minimal discipline referrals. That means that when you go to the academy, you just can't bring knives, guns, weapons, things like that. But if you get a talking in class, we probably won't count that. If you had a cell phone violation, which you can't have one at the academy, but if you did, then we wouldn't count that. So when it says minimal referrals, it means just the minor stuff we allow, and that kid can come back. And we'll share that with them when they're filling out these boxes. And then number 4, when it says I'll complete drug counseling and mental health services. All right, so if they have a teen court citation, teen court's going to require all of these things if it was a zero tolerance event. And we would allow them to use their teen court stuff to count for this. But if not, we would require this to a certain level on the early reinstatement, which we'll go over in just a minute. But for everyone else, the only thing that we require is the bare minimum, and that's the referral. By law, if somebody is alt-placed for what they called violent or disruptive, and I don't know why they have those 2 words. Me and Derry went over these 2 words for months. I get violent, but disruptive, isn't that just about everything? So that means to us, every kid that gets alt-placed, we need to have a mental health referral. So the referral needs to be done. All right, at minimum, the referral needs to be done. And so if you can do the referral at your school, and then like we said on the first page, if you don't do the referral, mark no, and that means I'll make sure it gets done. Okay? So then number 5, it says, I understand if I do not comply with this agreement, my period of alt placement could be extended. Number 6, I understand when I return from school, I'll be on a 1-semester behavior agreement. There's some schools that put the students on the wrong behavior agreement. There's a behavior agreement that lasts 1 year, 365 days, and there's one that lasts 1 semester. Someone who's been out a year, we only put them on the 1-semester one. That's the return from alt placement one. We would not bring them back and then put them on a contract for a year. We only put them on for a shorter period. Okay, so just make sure that you know that there's 2 behavior contracts out there. And then also share with them that while you're alt-placed, you're not allowed to be at any school events, which means dances, football games, not just at your campus, but any campus. Okay? So we did have a call the other day, I can't remember who it was, that asked, a student asked if they could go, this high school student's alt-placed, their elementary kid is having a special event, and it's his sibling, and the family was going, and he asked if he could go on campus on a Monday night for an hour. And our answer to that would be, that student's alt-placed and needs to be off school board property, but if it's a single time event like that and they're going to be with the family, they would have to get that approved through the principal. So you and your principal can approve that for a one-time event, but they cannot call you and say, I'd like to go to all the basketball games this year at Choctaw. Because that's too, no, we're going to say no because that's just not following the policy at all.
Brian, what if they're responsible to pick up their kid from school? Would those be not trying to be their brother or sister?
So we would allow them to do a pickup if they stay in the car. Like they can come pull up in the parking lot, don't have a car line or something, they can come out. We would not keep them from doing that. They just don't need to get out and come into the school. But they need to make you aware that that's what they're going to do. The worst thing that could happen is you've all placed them and then you see him on your campus and you're like, hey, bud, how come you never called me? You know, if he's making any plans or attempts to come on your campus, he should give you the courtesy call to let you know. And if he called me and said, look, I'm picking up my sibling, but I'm just going to pull up in the car and I'm not getting out, I would go, okay.
Marcel, are you saying that they want to come in and check out a student?
No, I've just seen some kids we all placed still on campus after school, and you know, one with their sister or brother. Edward's right across the street, and they're going over there to get their kids. You know, their brother.
So they live in the neighborhood and they walk to get them. All right. So again, I'm for it. We don't need to discourage that. But they should communicate with you and share that with you, is my feeling. They shouldn't do it without calling you because they're under a discipline sanction.
And if if they
Yeah.
do show up? What do you?
We should
So
treat that
if-
just like you would them coming up in the car. If they're picking up their kid or their brother,
Yeah. So
pick your brother up and get the heck out.
that's right. So if they do show up and they didn't call you, I would call them over and go, hey, let me talk to you for a minute, and pull them aside where no one's at and say, look, what are you doing here? You know you're all placed. And if they tell you they're picking up their kid, you go, that's fine. But you need to call me if you're coming on my campus. And then ask them, is this going to be a daily thing? Or are you just picking them up today? Or are you doing it on Mondays and Wednesdays only? I need to know. And then, if they answer that and they say they're going to pick them up just today, then just don't make it any more of an issue than it already is. If you know he's just picking up his kid. But truthfully, he should let you know.
What if they show up to a sporting event?
Then they should be removed. Yeah. You would notify the SRO, and then you would remove them. And I've seen schools where they refund the ticket, and I've seen schools that do not refund the ticket. I'm not going to get into that. Yep. You're on your own there. But they should be removed. So I would have the parent and the student initial all these boxes, and I would tell them that you're going to ask them to sign the bottom, but what you're asking them to do, and they can refuse, is you're asking them to sign, and the signature doesn't mean they agree with everything. It just means that you went over it with them. So I tell them, look, I just need your signature that says I went over these 8 things with you. And by signing it, you're just agreeing I went over it with you. You're not agreeing to all 8 of them. So if you don't like something, that's not what we're talking about. And then if they just refuse to sign, you'll say, well, I'll give you a copy of this without your signature when we're finished. Okay? So that's the first 2 pages are actually one document. It's the MIS number, and it's got the same MIS number at 6326. The next page is the same MIS number, so it's now a 3-page document then, okay. This 3rd page, this is the form that you were going to go over with every student about early reinstatement and how to return early. In years past, we've had an early reinstatement for an expulsion, but not an alt placement. And I went over this at the discipline meeting, so I won't, go over all of it. But what we had is huge inconsistencies, and some schools would offer it and some schools wouldn't. So right now what we're doing is every student that's alt placed gets the opportunity to come back after 90 days. Every student. So when you alt place them and you tell them the length of the time that they're out, you can now say, would you be interested in reducing the number of days that you'll be out? And they can answer the question yes or no.
Ron, is that 90 calendar
90
days?
school days. 90 school days. So I met with 3 families yesterday, and 2 of them had opted not to do the early reinstatement. And one of them is going to try. And what their argument was is there was no disrespect. They appreciated me offering it, but when we looked on the calendar, they were only coming back with 4 weeks of school left. And the last 2 weeks is all testing. So it just doesn't make sense this late in the semester. I could see people passing on it. If someone was to get alt placed in December, if you count 90 days, why would they come back to school with like 8 days left in school? It just doesn't make any sense. So what we will do is go over this page with the parent and say, if you're interested in coming back on a shorter number of days, you have to be out 90 school days, you'll have to submit all of these documents to me, and my email address is on there. And what will happen is when I get an email with all of these documents, which we'll go over in just a second, I'll call you and we'll review it, and I'll say, hey, little Johnny just emailed me a packet from last semester. He's applying to come back early, and we'll have a conversation. If they've done all of these things, my thought is we've raised the bar for that kid and he's met the bar. I have no problem with him coming back, but you are the final say, you and your principal. So when I call you, it's not necessary to tell you the kid's coming back, but it's to tell you he's applied. The final say is yours, but I don't see why if he met the bar and the requirement, why we would not take him back. Now, but if you know of a reason, you can speak up then. Okay? So what I'll do is I'll sit down with the parent and I'll say, so I've shared with you when the length of this discipline is. It's the rest of this semester plus one. But I'll go into the meeting and Miss Manchester will count on a calendar and she'll write down the earliest day they can return. It'll be like April 8th. And so I'll say, right here it says you can apply to return on April the 8th. All right. So if you email me all of these documents, what I'll do is I'll call the school, and within a day or two I'll call you back with the rule. It's not a guarantee that you're coming back early, but you're allowed to ask to come back early. And that's the conversation I'll have with the student. It's not a rubber stamp guarantee. You're going to have to make sure you do a good job with these. And I've probably had 6 or 7 people apply, and only 3 have met everything that they need to meet. All right. The other ones, I've got 2 in limbo, and the other ones didn't meet the criteria that have asked to come back early. So going down this list, I'll share with the parents that I need you to print out clearly on a piece of paper. It can't be like smudge marked handwriting and I can't make it out, but because when you email it to me, I've got to be able to read it and I've got to be able to recognize what it is. So when it says proof of academic on track and passing grades in all core classes, if you print me out some grades for math, English, and science and it doesn't say anything else on the piece of paper, I don't know what that is. So I have to tell the parent, if you choose Okaloosa Online, or if you chose Florida Virtual School, or if you chose Okaloosa Academy, I need you to print out a transcript from them of each semester you've been there. So like if you got alt placed today, this is where it gets kind of tricky when you're having the conversation. If you get alt placed today, I need transcripts for this semester that you're in because it's going to end in December. So I need your grades for the classes you're in now. But you're going to ask to return next semester. Well, I need transcripts for that semester too. I need both. If you just send me a math and English and science grade written on a napkin, I can't make that out. So it's got to be like, you've got to go to your program, if it's Miss Corbin or if it's Crystal Jarrett, call them and say, hey, I need transcripts for each semester I've been out. Can you email them to me? And then print those or forward them to me. Then the next thing would be an attendance record and a proof of good behavior with 0 discipline referrals. So for an attendance record, what I like to share with them is, if you chose Okaloosa Online and you didn't get kicked out, you had good attendance. Because Christy Corbin will kick you out. And I look at them and say, Miss Corbin's going to kick you out if you don't log in a lot. If you fall behind a little bit, she gives you 1 warning email. Then she gives you a couple more days. If you fall behind again, your account's not going to work. And when you try to call her, she's not answering. So then your choice is Florida Virtual. But you've already wasted that time, so you're already further behind. But once you get kicked out of Okaloosa Online, you've already ruined your chances for early reinstatement. So they need to know that up front. Once you get kicked out, you just messed up. You're going to have to take the full load of your discipline. If you choose Florida Virtual School, they will do the same thing if you fall far behind, but they have a longer window of months to offer the class, so you've got more opportunity. So they're a little bit more lenient, but Miss Corbin's not. And then if you choose the Academy, they take daily attendance, and it would fall under the 9 days in a semester. Is anything over 9, I would consider excessive.
I want to tell you guys a couple things. So in an online program, the only way FTE is received is if a student completes that course. So Florida Virtual is not going to want the student to leave in the middle of the course and give us a grade because they're not completing and they're not getting FTE for it. And when I say completion, I mean they have to pass. So just know that. I would always advise not to go that way because we're not sure we could get transfer grades from Florida Virtual. I know some of the counselors at the high schools are able to get in and see it and pull a transfer grade themselves, and some aren't. So that becomes an issue. So if they're going alt placement, their best situation is Okaloosa Online or the Academy. Now for us, Okaloosa Online isn't the best situation because let me give you a scenario. The kid gets alt placed in January. They stay on and now they're coming back in 90 days. Whatever the 90 days is, they come back to us. They never completed Okaloosa online, and they missed our February FTE in our building. So guess what? Our district gets nothing for them for that semester. So we're taking that if they do all of that. So that's why you're seeing, 3 kids, 2 kids, whatever, but we understand that from that perspective. Florida Virtual is not going to be happy about that, because then they don't get their FTE.
And truly, if they don't finish a course, we're supposed to post an F to their transcript that
Right.
they failed
It's
because
just-
they enrolled and did not complete.
Right, so it's just like if they drop a course from us, right? In high school, you drop a course, after a certain amount of time, you get an F. Well, that's what Florida Virtual does. So that's a wonky situation. We can pull a grade and we'll work with it. We do it just like they transferred from New York or wherever. But if you can get a grade out of Florida Virtual, but that's wonky. So I would always advise away from that. But if they want to go that way, that's their deal, and maybe the early reinstatement isn't going to work for them.
And
So-
what is the cutoff for Oklahoma Online?
All right, so the cutoff for elementary is passed, and that's something that I learned this year that I never learned before, so I'm always learning something from another department. Elementary, the cutoff was in October, all right? So an elementary kid can't take Okaloosa Online first semester now. They're open for enrollment for second semester.
It's because their program is different. There's not enough time for a student to complete if they go in at a certain point.
So, but there is no cutoff for the secondary because they can prorate. That's what I've been told?
Well, so like if they're transferring from you, let's say in February, you would send whatever grades they have. They can put them in, they can do some pre-tests and try to get out of some pieces and put them in that way and try to get them to complete. It's hard, it's not an easy process. Of course, at the very end of the year, that's not going to work because they're not going to be able to complete anything. So again, at that point, the suggestion would probably be your best bet is the academy, because if they go Okaloosa Online doesn't run through the summer. So you can't, and let's say it's May and we're all placing, they go Okaloosa Online, they can't finish. So Chrissy's probably going to say no then. Like,
So
this
they
isn't
go to
going to
the
work.
academy, they take in what they have, and they let them finish out a week, 2 weeks of
And then they'd have to go back.
So
Next year,
the-
they could start Okaloosa Online next year. There could be some options.
Yeah, so did you have,
If they get all placed in the academy, those 9 days start over for truancy, or like if they've had 9 days
so
already in
since
school?
the academy is a brick and mortar school, their transcripts would transfer to another brick and mortar school, so everything would go, their attendance, their discipline, everything would carry over, so it's continued. So on that, and even though we're going over this checklist, we'll break off from that for a second. But so when we're meeting with parents, at the beginning of this year, I gave everybody the option to choose the academy or an online program equally. That was the discussion I was having with parents. All right. In the last month, from what I've learned, I'm now changing my tune. If a parent chooses Okaloosa Academy, to come back in 90 days is going to be easy. Because easier, and it's going to be pretty easy. They just got to meet the criteria. Because it's a brick and mortar school that can transfer and they can pick up with grades where they left off. If a parent chooses online, I've sat and thought about this for hours. There is no simple answer. It depends on what month, when in part of the year, are they taking semester classes, full year classes, what grade level they're in. So there is no simple answer, but I would tell parents that do your homework before you choose online. Because if the scenario comes up that they've reached 90 days and they apply to return and I check the scenario out, there's a good chance we're going to require them to go the 90 days and then finish the classes they have in progress. All right, and that may be another 4 weeks. And then the conversation I had with the 2 parents yesterday, we were talking about it. They chose Okaloosa Online. And so I said, well, look, you're going to go 90 days. That's going to take you to April something date. If you finish your classes, that means you're finished the semester. How can I put you back in school? What? You just finished all your classes. So that's the dilemma. Is so there's so many wrinkles if an alternative. So any kid who's alt placed can take their full discipline. We're only offering the early reinstatement for people who meet the criteria, and it seems like the academy is a choice that will be easier to meet that criteria if returning in 90 days is important to you. But if a parent says, well, I'm not going to go to the academy, you'll go, okay, then you can take the online. Don't discourage them. We don't care which one they take. I mean, it's not, we're going to give them the options, all right? But then when you give them the options, just share with them that the online, it could make it difficult to return exactly on 90 days. It might be 100 days or 120 days. Or if you finish the classes and there's not enough time to put you back in the school, it may not happen anyway.
I also be careful because it's a guidance issue as well. As Brian said, let's say they want to come back and their 90 days is the end of April and they just want to get back because they want to be at school. Well, you're coming back to semester exams, to courses you
That's
went
right.
in,
And can't
which
pay.
could hurt you. So that's also a guidance issue of, are you prepared to take these semester exams? Because you're
Yeah.
going to have to if you come back. So you might want to wait. If you've met everything, we can probably delay your early return until the beginning of the year.
Yeah. But on another side of that, though, is there's kids who we've alt placed that it's their senior year, and that's always a tough thing when they miss graduation. They may want to go ahead and have that opportunity to have the discipline lifted so that they can come on campus and go to those events. And so that's a conversation that you can have with them, and I can see some of them making sure that they weigh that as being important. The family I met with yesterday, they were like, we're just going to finish online. I'm not worried about the early reinstatement because it don't fit for us, because I think he was a 10th grader. Okay? So when we're going over these, what we're going to tell the parent is they need to print out a document for all of these, so grades in progress, attendance, and then if for discipline, if you go to the academy, you can have no discipline referrals. So there's kids at the academy right now, what I've been told is that they have no discipline referrals and they've never seen this happen. The kid's gone like 3 or 4 weeks or a month and they're waiting and to see if they mess up. So it's actually motivating those kids to have 0 referrals and not be written up. So that's the requirement. And then the next thing is a letter of apology to the principal. You can give them an example. When you're meeting with them, you can say, look, you just need to write something like, I made a bad choice, or I made bad choices at school, and I did not behave the way my administrators and my teachers and the people at the school that cared about me, that wanted me to behave. And so I've learned my lesson, and I'm going to try to come back and do better. And that would be a letter of an apology. So you can give them an example of kind of what to write.
Can I ask a question about documentation for homeschool? Because we had a parent who made the choice to have the child homeschooled. So what would that documentation be?
So if they choose homeschool, if y'all look in the computer, you don't see nothing on them because all their stuff disappears. All right, they're going to have the full discipline of being out the rest of this semester plus 1. But if they're wanting to come back early, we're going to have the parent, as a requirement, provide us with these documentations. Now for homeschool, the academics may look different, but a lot of them are doing that FLVS, the flex. So if they're doing that, they can print out a transcript. I've already received a few. But now if the parents chose homeschool, but they're making their own curriculum through that portfolio process, it is going to look a little funky, but that's why I'm asking everybody to send it to me, because if I don't know what it's supposed to be, I'll get with Sheila and them, because I know they do know, and I'll have them look it over, but we'll make sure it's vetted correct before it gets to you, so you're not wasting your time with it. So an apology letter, 2 character reference letters. What I tell every parent is I'll look at them out and the student, and I'll say, this has to be 2 adults that will write a statement about your character before you return. And what I'll share with them is the 2 adults does not need to be a family member. And I'll say, do you know 2 adults that would vouch for your character? And the kid always looks like he doesn't know what I'm talking about because he probably doesn't know what the character means. So I'll explain to him that, do you know 2 adults that will write that they've known you for an extended period of time? Like somebody could say, I've known you for 3 years and I know he makes good decisions sometimes. They don't have to write anything about the event that got him alt placed, but somebody needs to vouch for him to be able to make good choices, and the kid will lighten up and go, yeah, I know somebody. I go, well, you get him to write you a note. Do you know somebody else? And then they'll say, okay, I'll get these 2 adults to write that they've known me. And this one guy, he's known me 6 years. And so they'll kind of take ownership in it as I'm explaining it to them, that they need to have 2 character reference letters. And then the next bullet down is a letter for professional provider confirming completion of evaluation of a screener. And so this has also changed a little bit. And early on, I was missaying what the screening was. So I've learned a little bit from mental health counselors and Ms. Schroeder. So I'm going to try to wade through this, and if I misspeak, you watch, she'll cut me off. So what we're requiring is every student needs to have the screening done, all right? So if you're going to come back from an alternative placement, we're going to give everybody the referral, all right? Because that's required by law. Everybody's getting the referral. The referral for certain, they can decline it or accept it. And there's options on the referral, all right? So where if you choose online, you will give you this. If you go somewhere else, you can get it private. So the referral's done, but now to come back, you have to take the referral to another level and you have to be screened. All right, we would need a copy of the screening. The parent would have to provide a copy of the screening. We have mental health counselors employed by us that does the screening, and the screening has to be done face-to-face. If they choose the academy has someone there that will do the screening. So that's easy. If they choose the academy will do the screening, and the screening has letters and it's got an F on it. CFARS. So the screening is CFARS, and it can be done at the academy. We would need a copy of that. Now, if they choose online, then we would have to get a mental health counselor from their zone school, the school that they were attending, and that mental health counselor would reach out, but we would have to set up an appointment face-to-face because we're not going to do the CFARS over the phone or through Zoom. So that screening, it needs to happen at the beginning of the alt placement session. There's not a time limit, so if it's 3 days, 4 days, but within a week or two, they should be able to get in touch with a mental health counselor somewhere and get the screening done. They could go to Bridgeway and get the screening done, but we're offering it through our mental health counselors. All right, on the CFARS, I've seen the document, there's a place that they can write a recommendation, and this is where it gets foggy for me. So I'll talk slower so that Ms. Schroeder could explain it better. So they're going to write something on there. If they write that they feel like further services are needed, okay, so there's a form that was in the handout that's in one of the packets, that's correct. So if the mental health counselor writes on there that they have areas of concern and further services are needed for this student, for them to come back early, now we're talking about come back early on the 90 days, that's a privilege. We're going to require the parent to follow up with some sort of services, like they're going to have to go to counseling somewhere. We don't need to know the details of the counseling and what level their family is going through counseling. We just need them to provide documentation that they're going somewhere. So what I'll do is I'll require them to get a note from a Bridgeway counselor or the school-based counselor could be seeing them. That's correct, because they can do clinical counseling. So we would just need a note saying, I've seen Johnny since August the 8th and he's in continuing services or something. If we get that documentation, that's going to be good enough for that student to come back. They can be in counseling and they can return early. Being in counseling does not make it where you're not allowed to return. Because some students could be receiving counseling for years. We would never want to discourage that. And if we kept kids out that are in counseling, we would be discouraging the counseling. They would be going, I'm going to drop that because I want to go back to school. So what we're wanting to do is tell them that it's okay to be in counseling, but we need the documentation to put in the packet, and then we'll let you back, but we ain't got to know your business. You know, like you don't have to put on there any details about the counseling. okay? So am I thorough on, all right. And then the next sheet is 20 community service hours. And so I always will look at the parent and the student, and I'll say to the student, I'll say, look, 20 community service hours, in my mind, that means that you're about to work 20 hours for no pay. I say, have you ever worked 20 hours for no pay? And you know, the kid, he don't answer, but I'm saying, my dad used to call that character building. So you're about to do some character building. You're going to go in your neighborhood, and I've had other kids submit some. This one girl, she's walking a dog for her elderly neighbor every morning for 20 minutes, and the neighbor's signing off on it. I'm good with that. You know, that's community service hours. She's doing a good deed for someone else. You can share that as an example when you meet with these parents, as they can pick up limbs in somebody's yard and have somebody in the neighborhood sign off on it. They can go work in their church and have somebody in the church sign off on it. We're only requiring 20 hours, but I'm not against them putting 30 or 40 hours if the parent would like them to do more. And I always suggest to the parent, there's nothing wrong with them doing more, because if you do more and extra, when I put this packet together and send it to principals, it's going to be more impressive. And they'll look at that like, oh, that gives me a greater chance of getting back. And I go, yeah, maybe. So I always tell them we just require at least 20, but it's great that your kid's out doing something for somebody, and that's why there's community service hours. And then the last one is it's a documentation of a negative drug test. And what I tell parents is, you can go to CVS or Walgreens, spend $20. You ain't got to buy the expensive one. And you have to open it up, put the receipt next to it, have your kid take it and lay it on the table, and then just take a picture of it and print it out. And if there's a receipt for CVS or Walgreens, I'm not going to really ask a whole lot of questions about the results. I hope they're negative. There are families that have people in the household that have a medical marijuana license, and they've brought that up to me like, you know, my grandmother lives with me, she smokes all the time. And so what we're really wanting to emphasize here when you're having a conversation with them is what we really want is the parent and the student to have a conversation at home about drug use. And making them do a home drug test is going to bring that conversation to the surface. And if we've at least done that, that's at least what we want. It says on here negative. I've not gotten a drug test yet back that's positive, but when it happens that we, you know, get one, I don't know how we're going to, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I hope they're all negative, but I can see where in some households, if we tested everybody, you know, we'll see. We'll see. All right, and then the last part, you know, all these boxes that are on there when you're meeting with them, you'll say, I need you to print out paperwork that documents each one of these clearly. And then I need you to put them all together and then ask them, do they have access to scan those documents and email them to Mr. Humphrey? And so I've been getting some parents email me, they'll email me one document every once in a while. And that's miserable. Then I have to remember so I've been emailing them back. Do not email me until you have all the documents. Email them all together at once. And that's the only way I'm going to respond. If they email me one document, I'm going to go, this isn't all of it, and I'm going to hit send. So you let them know that they need to put all the documents together and email them on the 90th day, and that's the time that they will be requesting it. And then be real clear again that it's not a guarantee. What they're doing is asking to come back early. The final say will be our office will vet it, and then it will go to the principal, and so you and the principal will have a say. But again, like I said, if they meet where we've raised the bar, I'm for them coming back, okay? Because there are kids. Then the last paragraph on this form, below that, the paragraph below that, it says that be real clear that you will be on a behavior agreement on returning, and this behavior agreement has a different wrinkle than all other behavior agreements. So now we've got 3 behavior agreements. We've got a behavior agreement that lasts 12 months, one that lasts a semester, and then this one. And I want to think there's a handout in your packet of the behavior agreement, and I don't know if it has an MIS number. 6037. All right. So on that, you can go over that behavior agreement when you have your parent meeting on the day they're being alt placed. They're being sent out. If you'll go ahead and show them that, FYI, and put it in front of them and say, now understand, if you do the 90 days and you come back early, this is the standard you're going to be held at. Because you're coming back early, we're cutting you slack. So when you come back early, show them that the difference is you're going to check the option, and I think it's B, where the student has to go 90 days with no referrals back at your school. So if Choctaw is alt placing a kid,
Say from what level? That says
no referrals. Yes. So that means it, and this is the difference. All right. So we've raised the bar for early return. So what we've said is if it's a normal alt placement, the parent can take their normal discipline the rest of this semester plus next semester. And when that person returns, the behavior agreement they're on just says minimal referrals. I mean, they mess up a little bit and we'll still keep them. But if you're going to come back early, we're going to say you're going to have no referrals when you return for 90 days. Now, if a student does return to you after 90 days, he's come back early, we raised the bar, he met everything, passed all his classes, you know, he's pumped coming back to you. If he does get a referral, he goes back to his alt placement just to reserve the rest of his time. He's not out another year. And so I've had principals call and ask and say, well, if he comes back, can I alt place him for another year? And I'm like, no, it's not another year. He's just going to serve the rest of his discipline that we gave him. We're going to we're taking back his early return and making him serve what he was normally going to serve. Okay? So you can share that behavior agreement with families when you meet with them and share that scenario and let them know when they come back, they're held at a high standard now. There's not no more of this monkey business on campus. And then let them know that if they do violate it, they're going to just serve the rest of their term. They all need to know that up front. It'll make it real easy on the exit interview that you have with parents if everything's explained so that when they come back, they're not arguing. Because you can imagine they're all going, well, no one told me that. It's y'all's fault. You know, but if we're up front and we're showing them everything up front, it's just going to be easy on everybody. And it makes it easier. I can back y'all because everybody's following the procedure. So it makes it easier on you, makes it easier on me. Okay? And so that's page 3 of the handouts. I'm trying to go faster. The next part of the handout is a sample that I have, is a sample of a box of things that you can write your community service hours in. Tell them if they lose this, it's okay. They can just put it on notebook paper. Or they can make their own. We're just giving this to them as a courtesy. All right, it doesn't have to be on this one. And then the next page is the actual mental health referral. And I know this was updated. And do I have the updated one? Yeah. All right, 1020. All right. So the most updated one for the mental health referral is 1021. All right. So this is the referral that's required by law if you alt place a student for violent or disruptive behavior, and we've all agreed that all behaviors are disruptive, so this is everybody. Everybody you alt place has to have this. On the first form that we went over, if you don't check the box that you did it, then I have to do it. And I'll do it, but I just need to know if y'all did it. On this, there's this form is 2 parts. It's actually 2 forms. There's the upper part, and there's a discussion that goes with the upper part, and there's a different discussion that goes with the lower part. And this is the discussion I have with parents, and I'll tell them, hey, we're going to go over this 2-part form, and I'll share with them that this is required by law. And when I first was doing this, I read it off, and I'll say that this is a mental health service. And if you say that real loud, they'll look at you like you're saying I need mental health. So you need to preface it with, look, this form's for counseling. And we use the phrase mental health services. And that's why it's on here. I'm not saying, and so I'll ease them into it so they don't get offended. and let them know it's required by statute. The first box says, I understand that I'm being offered this referral because of statute. So check that box. Then have them initial it. So go ahead and give it to the parent and say, here, initial this because by statute, I have to share this form with you. But you don't have to take the counseling. But I'm telling you, I meet with a lot of folks. I'd say 99% of them jump on the counseling, and 99 are almost brought to tears that we offer counseling. So there's very few that get upset, but I have seen some that kind of, they think I'm calling them crazy. All right, then after the 4 blocks below that, you have to check one, but they need to know what alternative setting they're going to go to. If they don't know, you can't check the box. So sometimes parents want to think about it, like you've hit them with this discipline and you're giving them a choice of the academy, you're giving them a choice of Florida Virtual, Okaloosa Online, homeschool. Well, they'll say, well, I need to go home and talk to my wife or my husband, and can I have some time to think about it? You go, yeah, sure. They don't have to mark it right now, but they need to pick before we can mark it. And it would be nice if all this was done in one day, but sometimes you have to email this form, get a signature, and get it back. But the top part of this form is, if you choose the academy, they're giving you permission to let the counselor at the academy contact their child. If they choose online, you're giving them permission that a school-based mental health counselor is going to reach out to them by phone, and then if it's requested to have the CFARs, you're going to meet in person with the school-based counselor. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. All right. So they have to check what their options are, or they can refuse it. If they refuse it, are they coming back after 90 days? No, they just gave up their 90 days if they refuse it. They can serve the full term, the rest of the semester plus 1, and that's okay. That means we gave them the referral just like statute tells us to, but they're not following up the referral. All right, so that's the top part. I hand it to them and have them sign it and say that by signing it, you're picking your option. The lower part of this form, and I always share with them, I hate to give them a couple of paragraphs and tell them to sign it without giving them a moment to read. So just don't shove it at them and say sign it. Say if you'd like to read it, but while you're reading it, let me tell you what those 3 paragraphs mean. The 3 paragraphs are telling you that we're not allowed to share your child's info with anyone that's an outside agency. And if you choose the academy, for example, there's a counselor in the hallway at the academy, and right across the hall is a counselor from Bridgeway. And unless you give us permission, the counselor from the school can't talk to the Bridgeway counselor about your kid because there's privacy concerns. So by signing this, you're allowing them to talk. And so this is just giving them approval to talk. I've had parents sign the top and ask for help, but then refuse to sign the bottom. It's okay. They don't have to sign the bottom. You just let them know by not signing it, we're not going to be able to share info, and that may slow down services for your child. But that's as rude as you need to be. It may slow things down a little bit. But they can refuse that, and they may have personal reasons why they do refuse it. I've had quite a few refuse this bottom part, but I have a bunch of them mark the top part. Okay? So any question on the mental health? Is there anything I'm missing on the mental health thing? Because, you know, that example of how discipline has to talk to mental health. Here I am going over the mental health thing, and she's the expert. But it's because discipline's had to talk to mental health, and we've had to, you know, MTSS and counselor. That's right. I know.
One thing, just real quick, you know, if they refuse, that's fine, but get documentation that they refuse, because then that is our documentation that it was offered. Okay, so we got to have this. Heaven forbid something happened, and then we're questioned of why did this kid get offered that. So make sure that they at least check one of these boxes for our documentation purposes.
And Mr. Humphrey, I am going to correct one thing you said. He says if you don't do it, he'll do it. If you're the one having the meeting with the parent and doing the op placement, you need to do the mental health. Like, I appreciate Mr. Humphrey wanting to clean up what's not done, but please don't put that off on him. He's got so much on him. If you're the one meeting with the parent and he's not meeting with the parent, please try to handle that piece.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. what I see happening is if a kid violates a zero tolerance policy for board policy, they have a vape pen. You know, you're 10 days popping that kid and he's gone. There is no time. Like the mental health counselor may not have been on your campus. So sometimes we see that blank, and I understand that. Well, for zero tolerance, I'm supposed to meet with them anyway. So I'll do it then. But now for a behavior agreement, she's absolutely right. If you're violating a school-based behavior agreement because of the behaviors at that school, you should have already had that happen. It should not be marked no, or blank, or not done. Because actually, if it's not done, my advice would be don't move forward with the alt placement. I would say you're going to have to back off one of your strikes and give him another opportunity. Because the expectation is have MTSS done, have the mental health counsel referral done, everything done and in order. Which brings me to my next thing, and I'm going to go faster because I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Hold on. Y'all don't have blood sugar problems like I do.
I got glucose tabs, Brian. Let's go.
No. So, is everybody good that when you alt place a kid, we're going to refer to this thing handout as the packet. You're getting emailed the packet from Miss Manchester. If you'll put that packet on your screen and delete all other copies, then every time you alt place a kid, you'll go straight to this packet. You'll have that parent meeting and kind of share the talking points that we have over each one. It takes me 45 minutes to meet with a parent to go over that packet right now. And it gets to be monotonous sometimes, but it's important that they get all the information. They can't get misinformation, and you can't omit something because they all have options. So share with them that you're going to meet with them for about 45 minutes. I'm going to share with your options, and I want you to know you have all options. And then I always share with parents that whatever options you choose today on that packet, like if you choose online or the academy, if it's not working for you, you can call me back in a month and we'll switch it. If it ain't working for you, don't keep doing it. And just let them know that, and we'll have those types of conversations. The meeting for alt placing a kid, your approach should be helpful. You're there to help the parent. It's not really like a, by God, you're in a bunch of trouble now. It's not, the trouble's already happened. This meeting is to bring the family in and answer questions because they don't know our processes. So it's important to change it from a negative, condescending meeting to being a helpful one because there's a lot of options for the parent. Yeah.
If they don't keep the one that I emailed to them, there are different MIS numbers on some of these forms, so you may not have everything at your fingertips when you meet with a parent to alt place a student. So my suggestion is please try and keep it. It'll come from Brian because I'm just the secretary, but y'all will pay attention to Brian. But we just want to make sure you have everything at your fingertips. Otherwise, if you go to the MPOS to get this, you're going to have the alt placement separately. You're going to have the mental health thing separately. So just make sure you really pay attention to that email when you get it from Brian so that it comes as what we're calling the packet. They're not all the same MIS numbers. So we want to make sure you get everything you're going to need when you meet with the parents.
Can we also get copies of the behavior agreements?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially elementary.
Yep. So that's a good segue because the next thing we're going to briefly hit on is the behavior agreement. Yeah.
So at the top underneath where we put the student's name and school, is that their current school?
Yeah. So like if they go to Fort Walton Beach or Niceville or.
Okay, so beside that we put the mental health counselor that's currently at our school. Right?
That's correct.
And so I'm assuming then that say most of our students, which we don't have many from elementary that get alt placed, they choose to go to LEPA Okaloosa Academy. So we need to explain that they're going to then, if they agree, see a different mental health counselor.
So at the academy, they have their own mental health counselor. That's correct. You would only need to bring your mental health counselor at your school in if the student was to choose an online program. But this late in the semester, Okaloosa Online is not available for 4th and 5th graders, but Florida Virtual is. So you would have to share that. They would have to go homeschool probably, but Ms. Corbin can help them with that. So if they choose Florida Virtual School, that throws a wrinkle in the mental health counselor that I don't know the answer to, so I'm looking for help. But you can see they ain't jumping.
If they choose Florida Virtual, then I would tell you to contact Ms. Schroeder and she would have to figure out what we can do. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and on that note, one thing we haven't said, if they're going to, so your school-based counselor, especially if they've been working with the student, you're going to want to provide that top page of the alt placement and a copy of any mental health related paperwork they might have signed. Because if they're going online, that your school-based counselor is going to need that information anyway, so that they know to contact that parent to do the screening, especially if they haven't been screened yet. But let's just say they've already been working with the student, and that student is going to go to LEAP. Your school-based mental health counselor will then call Erica at LEAP and say, hey, I've been working with this, and kind of do a pass-off. Does that make sense?
And I will say also, for the Okaloosa Online or the homeschool, most of our mental health counselors, if they're already working with these kids, want to continue that relationship. That's just who they are as mental health providers. So we have set up a system where they can still provide services to those kids virtually, and most of them will. If for some reason it's over and above what they're going to be able to do through a virtual environment, they will refer those kids to Bridgeway and do that whole referral process. The only reason I'm saying that to you is include that counselor in what you're doing, because they have a vested interest in those kids on their caseload, and they want to, if they can, continue and that's in your best interest, because the better services those kids get, the better they're going to be when they come back to you.
Okay. So if you have a question about that packet, even if you think about it in a month, maybe you get your first alt placement. If you want to review it, you can call our office. And if I'm not there, Miss Manchester is very familiar with that packet. So we'll kind of walk you through. So everybody needs to kind of be given the same message across the district with that packet, okay? So before that packet, and I did that one first only because there's some changes to that this year as we've rolled this thing out. I'm going to go back and do the behavior agreement. So when you put someone on a behavior agreement, we've got an elementary one, a middle one, and a high school one. They're almost all the same. But the expectation is if you put someone on a behavior agreement, that's a discipline consequence that we hope works, and it shapes that kid's behavior. For a lot of kids, if you put them on a behavior agreement, that might get their attention and you may never hear from them again. But there's going to be those kids, you put them on the behavior agreement, they're going to test you. And they're going to take all the opportunities they can. So for those, this is the part about, we've got resources at schools that we need to be using before we get to an extreme discipline consequence like alt placement. So we have mental health counselors and MTSS and things like that in place, and we need to make sure we're using it. So it's part of our process that if you put someone on a behavior agreement, it would be nice if you went ahead and referred them to MTSS, but I know that not everybody has the personnel and maybe they're swamped and they might not can get to it. But this would be my question. If a kid's on a behavior agreement at your school for 6 months, how come you hadn't got him on there in 6 months? I mean, I can understand 3 days, 4 days, a week. But if he's been on there for an extended period of time, the expectation is he's already been referred, and so that's going to be one of the first questions when you violate his behavior agreement. I'll say, hey, has he been in MTSS? I'll go, when did he start? And, you know, some of the older people that have been doing discipline, that's the first thing they tell me. They're like, we did MTSS in January, and then they ain't even got to the kid's name yet because they know that question's coming. So the expectation is put them on a behavior agreement, plan the MTSS as soon as possible, and start putting strategies in place. And then the mental health referral needs to be done at least by the second step, because that's letting you know. So all that stuff should be in place before we get to the third. If you alternatively place a student and you've not done MTSS and you've not done the referral, then we're going to have a talk about it. That's probably the only time that I have conversations with people doing discipline that we start talking about having to go backwards. I don't like to have that conversation. It's kind of awkward, and I know y'all don't like it. I would rather not go backwards. If he's on step 3, we're going to have to take a step away and give him another chance. But it's because if we don't follow our own process, how can we go forward? I mean, we have to go backwards. We've got to do our process. You can't skip it. So it's real important that if you think you've got to step 3, you need to make sure everything else was put in place.
Can I ask a question regarding MTSS? So, you know, MTSS is not like one meeting and then we're done. And so I'd like to talk about letting the MTSS process work before
So, and that's exactly, Heather, what I was getting ready to talk about. So I think sometimes we have in our mind that the MTSS team at your school is these 8 people who meet once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month. It depends on your school's process, and you have to wait to get them on an agenda, and there's 500 kids that need to be on the agenda, so now you're scheduled 3 months out. Like, I've been the MTSS coordinator and know that how that works. You need to talk to your MTSS coordinator, and I think about you and Jen Barrow. Man, I would leave school and Mr. McElroy and my MTSS coordinator, like I'd leave them talking all the time in the afternoons. And Mr. McElroy did a great job of going to Jen and saying, Jen, I've got these kids, they're on the radar, like, you know, they're becoming high flyers, or I'd put them on an agreement and now they've just gotten their first strike. Like, we really need to talk, because what can happen is instead of waiting for that meeting 3 weeks from now, you have an administrator, you have your MTSS coordinator, you might have a behavior analyst who will help you, you might have your school psych who will offer suggestions. There's all kinds of people, and then obviously if they're having particular issues in a certain class or two, I'd have those teachers be part of that team, and you can schedule that whenever as the administrator, that hey, as a team we got to come together and problem solve what's going on with little Tracy, because she's about ready to she's getting herself in a lot of trouble. And then being on an agreement is not an intervention. That's a discipline consequence. Putting a student on an intervention, on an agreement is not an intervention. So like, I've had conversations with administrators and said, well, what interventions have you put in place? Well, we put them on an agreement. Okay, that's not an intervention. That's not helping that student. Erica's got a nice little cheat sheet, help sheet for you that's got suggested interventions. But again, you guys, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It depends on what's going on with that kid and what that kiddo needs. And so you do want to, and that goes back to what Ms. Lightborn was saying about to put a kid on an agreement on Monday, you strike them on Tuesday, you second strike them on Wednesday, and by Friday you've all placed them. You've not even given a chance for the interventions to work. And if that kid's not a severe safety threat, and this is just petty behaviors, you're not giving your process a chance to work. So that's why when Mr. Humphrey says, maybe even before the agreement, if you have that kid that is just like the gnat that flies around your head, I mean, you know what I mean? It's not like major offenses, but it's constant. You probably want to refer them to an MTSS team long before you even get to that agreement, because you want to try, our goal is to help these kids and keep these kids in school. Questions about the MTSS piece?
Include your mental health counselor too, because
they mental health, they are fantastic, yes, and they will help write the PMP, and every time the team meets to problem solve the kid, there should be documentation in that PMP. And if you want to talk it through, call me, call Terry, call Kathy, call Erica, call any of us. Brian's dealing with all the other stuff. We'll help with the MTSS piece. And then before I sit down, I completely forgot to introduce Miss Cherry Manchester over there. If you guys don't know Miss Manchester, she can answer almost any question you may have because she's been doing this so long. So thank you, Cherry, for all you do.
And please remember that every school has a behavior interventionist assigned to them. That is another great resource, and a social worker. Those are other people. Your social worker may not be the person that ends up seeing that child, but they are full of resources. But a behavior interventionist can come observe that child. There's 2 ESE instructional coaches that can be called upon to go into classrooms to observe these kids. So those are the things. We have Chris Moore is also another one of our behavior interventionalists that can come in. If you have a child that's heading down this path, ESE, Gen Ed, you don't know what to do with them, call on those resources. And there is also the district child study team that's meeting every other Monday. That's something that you're triggering. You've got kids that you don't know what to do with. You're sending an email saying, we have a child, things aren't working, we're not sure, do we need to change a placement? Is that something, we're struggling with this child? And that's an email to me. It doesn't have to be an ESE kid. It could be a kid headed towards ESE possibly. Where we get with you and a team of professionals to talk about what you've done, what other resources we know that we can throw at you to help you. So that's something that just takes an email for us to all sit down and help you with these hard kids.
And one last thing, and this has just happened, well, it happens. So if you have a child that you're now outplacing, and so it comes to us for whatever reason, the parent's upset, somebody's upset, or you're upset, or whatever, and we go in and look at the child's history, and they had 12 discipline referrals this year, they had 27 last year, they had 15 the year before that, they had 10 the year before that, they had 15 the year, and now you're like 27 pages deep in the AS400. You guys know what I mean? And that child's never been to a child study team, or there's not record of discussion in MTSS of behaviors being discussed. That is a problem. That is a child we've let slip through the cracks. And when that child does something drastic that's a major safety concern, that kind of falls back on us of, man, this kid's been crying for help for years. What have you done? Right? So when you get those kids that come to you and now you're seeing there's pages of discipline history and you don't know what to do, call me. We'll talk about where to start. Okay?
I just have a quick clarification question, because this is a wall that I kept hitting, and it may just be misinformation out there. When I have called my behavioral specialist, or I have called my mental health counselor, both of them said, well, have parents sign the paperwork saying I can observe them or I can see them?
So yes, and so legally speaking, because they're licensed, there's certain legal things, but what I would do is when you know you need to consult with them, what I would do is I just picked up my phone or an email, hey, I have a kid I really need to talk to you about, when can we talk? And then they can explain the steps that what they need from you. But in the meantime, they can give you some suggestions if you just tell them what's going on.
So if the parents don't sign the paperwork, our hands are kind of...
They can still go in a classroom and observe the classroom. I mean,
they can't write a formal report or...
Because I'm coming up with that, a bunch of my parents are like, nope, nobody's observing my child, nobody's talking to my child, nobody's...
But I will also tell you, Erica has been doing some observations for us informally, and it's not that she's necessarily observing that specific kid, but maybe how that child's interacting with the environment. What could we tweak in the environment possibly that could help that kid be more successful? Another great resource.
Thank you.
I'm going to make an observation. Would it be premature to get referred to a counselor at the time of the contract? I mean, if you're putting them, to get supports going.
So they could screen them to see if they qualify for services.
Okay.
You're talking about the mental health counselor, or you're talking about the guidance counselor for MTSS?
Mental health.
Yeah.
Well, and
So there's nothing wrong with doing it early. You can't do it too early, but you can do it too late. So if you want to do it at the time of the contract, that's wonderful. You're proactive. You're on the ball. But you're going to have to communicate real good with the people on your campus to make that happen, because usually in the past, disciplined people would not talk to guidance counselors and mental health everybody was in their own silo. Everybody's going to have to kind of communicate better to make sure all these things are in place, but do them as early as possible. So on the behavior agreement that we were referring to, Erica did make a document, and I don't know if it's in the handout or not, or it is. I may be the one that has this, so I won't hold this up. So what I'll share with you is, on the behavior agreement, everybody has a student and a parent that it has to sign it. You put someone on a behavior contract, you bring the student in to sign it, right? And if they refuse to sign, you write refuse to sign, but they're still on the contract. Even though they refuse to sign, you'll write refuse to sign, but date it, and that contract's effective. You know, they're signing it because you offered it to them. They're agreeing that this was offered to me. They don't have to agree that the parent might say, I don't want to be on a contract. Well, politely you will say, well, I'll give you a copy of it unsigned, but it goes in effect today. And then you'd move forward. So on the behavior contract, we've always talked about, we would want them referred to MTSS. And I know I hear a lot of people in the district talk in their departments about MTSS for academics, and then there's not a lot of talk about behavior, like what strategies you do for behavior in MTSS. So Erica has made a chart that has a lot of tier 1 and truthfully a lot of tier 2 and some tier 3 strategies that we all should be implementing at our schools. I'll bet you, as I look down at, I would bet you that you're already doing a lot of them. It's not nothing new, but we just need to document it. And so there needs to be a way to document it and tie it to the behavior agreement. So our thought is to put these strategies on the back of the behavior contract so that when they get steps, you can like have a little checkbox or a date. And we'll bring the behavior contract in contact with some strategies. Okay, and that way we'll be better at documenting, and it will be on paper. Is that correct? Okay, like old fashioned.
So tier 1 is the stuff you do for all kids. So like if you're a PBIS school, that's your school-wide expectations, that's your positive reinforcement that you're doing. It may be just some of your routines and procedures you have in place. Like it's the thing that applies to everybody. When you have that student that then is on an agreement or elevates to that, that's not working for them. Guys, interventions really work. And I don't remember if it was you or you, one of you, Mr. Kendrick. Was it both of you maybe? Just real quick, and Brian, I know you're hungry, and I'm sorry, but real quick, because I want you guys,
obvious?
To know this. I'm so passionate about this because I believe no kid is born bad. They don't come out of the womb bad. They have learned behaviors. They have neglect. They have trauma. They have all kinds of things that they're battling, and you can help them, and we can win sometimes. We had a little guy in 6th grade, and I think I had 3 teachers leave that year because of that kid. Just kidding. Probably considered it though. That he was in trouble every single day, all the time, and so it finally we were working the system. We were problem solving. We had teacher checklists. They were rating behavior. It was going home. It was getting signatures. He was rating his own. Like we had done all kinds of things. And finally, it had come time. He had gotten his 3rd strike, and his grandma and his grandpa came in to me, and literally grandma sat there and cried, and she was like, please don't do this to him. Please don't send him to the academy. Please he's coming to live with us. Just give us one more shot. And I sat there and I thought about the fact that this kid, when he got in trouble in unstructured settings, so usually it was in the hallway, or it was in the lunchroom, or at PE, or if the class was not very engaging, it was in that downtime, so to speak. And so I told Grandma, I said, okay, I'm gonna give him one more shot. And I said, but here's my conditions. 1, when you get on campus, you're gonna go get your breakfast, and you're coming straight to the office. You will no longer have breakfast with your friends. 2, you will not change classes when everybody else is changing classes. So after the tardy bell rings, then you go straight to your next class. 3, lunch. You're going to go get your lunch. You're bringing it back to the office. You're not eating lunch with your friends. I said, and you're not going to get any more referrals. Well, at first, of course, he was a little, but we got into our routine, and he started getting positive praise. Hendrick, you hadn't seen you in trouble lately. Good deal. And you could just see the little grin start. He had never been praised in his life. He had been in trouble his whole life. And so it finally came to a point, I think it was you and I, we were like, okay, Kendrick, it's time. We're gonna let you start eating breakfast with your friends, and let's just see how it goes. Do you know he chose not to do that? He said, He said, I'm doing good. And he went from a DF kid to an AB student and didn't get referrals. Like, it can work. You just got to figure out what it is.
And here's the other story. All his siblings, alternative in place. He's the only one in the family, cousins, everybody that had not been alternative in place. And the great thing was next year, I moved to Destin. I'm out there dusting, and Megs is playing. He runs up to me, Mr. Schroeder, Mr. Schroeder. He's on the football team. And everything. He hadn't been in an office. So it was like a, but it could have been easy. He was in pain. It could have been easy just to send him. But
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about, I'm talking about.
All right, so everybody's good that we've got a procedure for putting someone on a behavior agreement, and we've got procedures in place during the behavior agreement, and then procedures for alt placing. As long as you're following the procedure, you're good. All right, if you've got a question about it, call ahead of time, and we'll talk about it, and we'll all be on the same procedure. If you're following the procedure, you'll never be asked to overturn your discipline and go backwards. You'll always get support 100% of the time. And everybody that's always followed procedure that's called me, we've supported you. And every time y'all call me, I end up calling Sheila. Sheila always supports. Tracy always supports. Mr. Chambers always supports when it gets to him, as long as everyone's followed the procedure. Every once in a while, somebody don't follow procedure, that's different. But then if you don't, you need to own it. Say, my bad, and then make it right, okay? So on the early reinstatement, and this is more of a note that Tracy would probably need to make a note of, because I don't know the answer, is Office of Civil Rights, while they were here, they asked a lot of questions about the district. And one of the things was they were wondering how we tracked early reinstatement kids. And we've only had 3, so I told Steve, hey, we had 3, I counted them. But in years in the future, we need a way to track those, so there needs to be an entry code. So be on the lookout if you're the discipline person. Once that entry code's made, if a kid was to come back early, we're probably going to code that. That way it can be tracked, and they can keep up with who's coming back and who's not, okay? So just FYI, if you see that coming, let's all make sure that we do that, okay? Extending a behavior agreement, and those behavior agreements were written years ago by the principals all got together, so I'm good with what's written on there, but over the years, the interpretation of some of the language has changed. So I've had calls where a kid has been on a behavior agreement for 12 months, and he's only had 2 referrals. And the principal wants to extend it because they know they can extend it 1 semester. And I'm not for extending behavior contracts just to catch the kid. So the only way, and this was the discussion years ago, and since I'm old, I can remember it because I remember being there. The discussion was, if a kid has got multiple referrals and you could have violated him, like he's on a behavior contract for 12 months, you've got to month 11, and he's just got his 3rd or 4th referral, you've been cutting him some slack, you're allowed to call him in and go, look, I could violate you right now, but I don't want you to go. I'd like you to work with MTSS. I'd like you to work with the mental health counselor. I'd like you to document these strategies that we're doing, and I'd like to give you another chance. But to do that, I'm going to extend your thing for 1 more semester. To me, I'm more comfortable with that. That's an easy conversation to have with parents if you're doing it that way. But it's a hard conversation if a parent says, my kid only had 2 referrals the whole year, and the day before it was going to expire, they got him for a vape. And he should got in trouble for a vape, but it's just a shame that it looks like we went to the last day and he only got 3. Which brings me to the point that as you're handling discipline, I know that everybody in here is, you're hired to do discipline, so you have to wear your discipline hat, but everybody in here is compassionate and everybody loves kids, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Your compassion sometimes getting in the way of your discipline hat, and we give kids more than 3 chances. And if we went and asked, everybody in here is giving kids more than 3 chances. There's nobody that sent a kid on 3. All right, you're giving them 4, 5, and 6. And for me, those make the hardest conversations. All right, because whatever you do, if it's shared, there's no secrets. The question always comes to me is, my kid got sent on the 4th referral, but another kid, he's had 15. And I'll go, that ain't right, because parents lie to me all the time. I mean, look. And I'll look, and the parent's right. I'm like, how'd they know that he had 15 first? They should know that. But at any rate, giving people extra chances puts us on a slippery slope, because it makes it look like you were selective. Like, did you give football players extra? Baseball, I mean, was ESE kids not getting the same? So whenever you're selective, we're on a slippery slope. So that's why, and I mentioned this at the discipline meeting last time, but I think it's important, so we'll mention it briefly again, is if you're going to give people extra chances, your best out is to refer them to MTSS and document strategies and document where they're working or not. If you can document that strategies are working or they're seeing a counselor, then that would justify you giving him more opportunities. Because you can say, look, we put these strategies in place. He was getting in trouble in PE all the time, but we put these strategies in place and now he doesn't get in trouble in PE at all. So the strategies were working, but now he's getting in trouble on the bus. So we want to keep him there longer and put more strategies on the bus and see if that helps. So the MTSS and all that in the documentation that you do, it gives us an out, and it's what we should be doing truthfully. Now, and I don't know if that's what's happening. If I went and asked everybody why that kid got 7 chances, I don't know if everybody would have a legitimate answer. I don't want to ask that. But if you're giving kids multiple chances, it needs to be tied to the strategies we're putting in place to help their behavior. That makes perfect sense. You can defend that all day long. I've seen where kids have had 14 chances. So that's why it's important. If we are going to do that, there needs to be a justifiable reason tied to the strategies. Okay? And it's okay to do it. Just be real careful. And if you're not doing it, then I don't know how we would answer that. Okay? Y'all, everyone, this is the second year that we've had the tobacco and vape. I know elementary schools don't use it as much, but they do. The tobacco vape course, many of you have called me and asked us to go more strict. You know, that's going to have to be a bigger decision. It can't just happen overnight, and we may look into that. But vapes is on the rise to be the largest number, the biggest disruption on school campus other than tardies. And I'll share with you, last year we had 151 people take the vape course. You can take the course that's offered for free online, and it will take 2 of your suspension days off. So 151 people took it last year. That saved us 300 days suspension. So that's good. This year we've already had 120 people take it, and we're not even halfway through the year. We're en route to double the number from next year, from last year. So vape stores are popping up everywhere, and vapes are on your campus. And the bad thing about vapes is some of the kids are smoking water vapor. Some of them are smoking nicotine, so they couple it with tobacco on the assessor coding. So it goes tobacco vapes. But some of the vapes have something more severe in it than nicotine. And so that's where we end up testing it. So we're in this whole new, and it's growing. I've actually had a group of students who vaped Pine Sol because they couldn't afford the tube, so they just poured some Pine Sol in there. Because it looked like the other juice. Yeah, so they were being creative. But nonetheless, the vape incident's growing. And so I would just say, if I was at the school, I would take a hard stance on vapes. I think your parents would appreciate you taking a hard stance and being active in making sure if there are vapes on campus. You know, we can't frisk kids as they come down the hall, but you can be near doors and be near bathrooms and see if you can be out visible. We had one a middle school that had no vapes for the entire year. It wasn't anyone that's in here that I'm aware of, though. But that's not possible. If you don't see any vapes for the entire year, it's because you're not looking. If you're in middle school or high school, they're there, and if you're the discipline person, everyone on your campus and your parents would appreciate you being strong stance on no vapes.
Is there a way to get that course in Spanish?
The course we don't offer, but we can email and ask, because Palm Palm Beach County offers it, and it's a group of parents down there doing it for free, or a group of teachers, but we will ask. And you would think down there they've got more Spanish-speaking people. So it,
So what do we do when we have a student that doesn't speak, read, or write English?
so if they want to take the vape course, is that what you're referring to? So if we have a translator, they can do it at school and have the translator sit next to them. So they're allowed to go sit in STP for a timeout, and it takes about 2 hours, and just have somebody sit with them, and we'll give them credit.
Or
But-
a student on access points to that.
The same thing is somebody can read it to them. The course is geared towards 8th and 9th grade reading level. But we've let a 5th grader take it, but we had the parents sit with them. And so I'll offer it to anyone if they
But they don't have to do it.
they don't have to. They can do it at home and print out that's right. They can do it at home. Or they can refuse it and take the 3-day suspension, and we've had people to do that. So it's just a way to remove 2 of your 3 days is taking the course. And just know that by our numbers, it's probably something we will address to try to take the firmest stance as we can. But just understand, we're never going to frisk kids. You're never going to be able to pat them down just because you want to. So, I know I've talked to many of you where they have these things in their clothing. And you don't want to go find them. Just a couple of notes is the suspension letters for out-of-school suspension and in-school suspension by statute, they have to be mailed out within 24 hours. So I understand that everybody here gets busy, and then if you have a discipline secretary that's new, they get busy too. But by statute, they have to be submitted to Miss Manchester within 24 hours of the assignment. If it's 48 hours, that's okay. It happens. 72 hours, you might get a warning email. We have schools that are 2 to 3 weeks behind. So that doesn't make sense to me why that's happening, but just know it's a requirement, and then we want to meet that requirement if we're ever audited. We don't want to have suspension letters dated, mailed out 3 weeks late. But imagine if you're the parent and my kid just got suspended and he served the suspension Friday, and then 3 weeks later I get the letter. Most parents will call and go, "Hey, he got in trouble again? I told him not to do that." And I'm like, "No, ma'am, that's from the original one." And they'll always ask, "Well, why am I getting it now?" And that's a good question. So just keep your suspension letters up to date. That means you're going to have to communicate with the discipline secretary and make it sure that that's happening. And then the discipline secretary needs to keep up with the discipline person.
And there needs to be a backup secretary as well, Brian. I've mentioned that when I was able to have my discipline secretary. They have to have a backup, whether it's the AP that does it, or somebody needs to back them up because they do get sick, they do have babies, whatever, but they need to have somebody that can back them up to take their job in their absence.
Yeah, because then that might be what the hang up is. But once you get 2 or 3 weeks behind, if you're pretty busy, you may never get caught up. Not during this school year. You may get caught up in June. So it's really something to stay on top of because it is a requirement for 24 hours. And so, and there's 2 things I'm just going to share because I've been at some schools and some things. I'm just going to share them real quick. One is I met with a parent who was almost in tears because the daughter had brought alcohol to school, but at a football game. But the mom was not in tears because the girl's in trouble. She was in tears she almost wanted to hug me. And I kept saying, "Ma'am, it wasn't me." She told me that I needed to make sure I reached out to the admin at Niceville because she dropped her daughter off at the football game, and her daughter did some things she shouldn't have been doing, hanging around the wrong people. But the administration at the football game noticed it and pulled her aside and then called the sheriff's deputy. And she felt like without them taking the extra to notice it, if they were over just sitting down, not paying attention, her daughter may have been in more trouble that night. And so I'm sharing with you that sometimes the duties you do, you may look at it as like you're the bad person, but really there's people out there that appreciate the work you do. And when I was meeting with her, I had to calm her down for me to get through my meeting because she was just so emotional wanting to say thank you because her daughter could have It could have been real bad. And then the other thing is, I went to prior, and I don't know if everybody does this, but they were having an assembly with students, and they pulled them all in a room, and maybe everyone does that, and I just don't know it. But I would suggest that that's a great practice, because every few weeks I would remind students, especially the little ones, don't bring things to school that can get you in trouble. Because always we have elementary kids that just happen to put something in a book bag, and we've seen knives, we've seen tasers. How does a second grader get a taser? But we have to give them discipline. So it's very important that they know not to bring it, and telling them once doesn't get it done. Like we could tell them all the first day of school, they don't remember that. So the meetings that y'all have at school with your student body, if you could just take 60 seconds out to plug, do not bring anything that you do not need to bring. You only need to bring school supplies. Anything else could get you in trouble. And if it can save 1 or 2 elementary kids, it's worth plugging every few weeks. And I mean, I wouldn't go around showing them pictures of knives because they'll all start crying, but they don't need to bring a steak knife. And things like that are maybe a couple of seconds on your end, but it could keep us from all placing a second grader or a third grader that wasn't thinking, okay? So I always will have a ton of discipline topics, but I'm good where we're standing right now. I think that we're in a good place with the alt placement early reinstatement. So
So I know it's been a long day and we went over, but hopefully you've heard some things that you weren't sure about. You were able to get answers to any questions you may have had. One thing that we have not said that needs to be said: when your threat assessment team meets to determine whether a threat was substantiated or not, credible, you know the 3 options. I haven't done one in a while, so I can't remember the 3 options, but there's 3 options. And they report that back to you, well, hopefully as the administrator, you're part of that team. And you make a determination to alt place. The threat assessment team does not make a recommendation necessarily. It's not, a threat assessment team cannot alt place a student. Only the administrator can make that decision. They can have a discussion about how severe the threat is, and I think legally they can leave it at that.
yeah,
Really,
inevitably,
their job is to determine what kind of threat it is.
inevitably the administrator owns the discipline. So don't pawn it off on the threat assessment. The threat assessment is the time for that group to get together and put their expertise in and grade the threat as either high level threat, low level threat, credible, not credible. If it's high level and that group says it's high level, then the administration, which could be you at that time, depending on who's on campus at the time, but you or the principal is going to have to make a decision on discipline. And we will discipline accordingly. But we'll wait until the threat assessment makes their findings, and we'll use that information, but we inevitably, the administrator owns the discipline.
Okay. You have hard jobs. You have really hard jobs. And unfortunately, you get to deal with a lot of the yucky stuff, and you get the parents who are mad, and truly, sometimes, I mean, it feels like they're mad at you when they're yelling at you and cussing you up one side and down the other. I get that. But truly, they're not mad at you. They're mad at the situation. They're mad at what their child's done. They're mad that they've gotten caught, and they're mad that this is the consequence, and now this is how it's affecting my life. Brian said something earlier. Sometimes you just gotta listen and let them vent and choose your word. I am so sorry that you were frustrated by this situation. I understand that. You know, I understand that, but our policy is this, and this is what I've got to do. And just stay calm. Don't let them get your blood pressure way high. And that's hard to do, but the last thing I want to say is this. You can't do it by yourself. Your principal can't do it as a principal, and the principals who are in here, you can't do it by yourself. If you have 2 administrators at your school, 3 administrators, 4 administrators, 10 administrators, You can't do it by yourself. Your staff has to be part of the solution. They have to be part of the problem-solving process. As much as they want you to fix the 120 kids that are driving them up the wall, they have to be part of the solution, and you have to have those conversations with your leadership team I need your help. I need your help, because I can't do it by myself. As the disciplinarian, I can't fix it. I need your help. Okay? Thank you guys, and
One more thing, I want to circle back, because you guys heard a lot of forms and a lot of technical stuff, so I want to circle back to, does your school have a vision? Does your school have a vision for discipline, for behavior, and how that should play out? And if it doesn't, then we need to work on that. If it does, then you need to ask yourself, do all of my teachers, my staff, my custodians, my secretaries, does everybody know the vision? Are we all walking in the same direction? And if not, then that's a conversation to have, and maybe some meetings to talk about, okay? And then, am I part of PBIS? Am I the leader of PBIS? Am I part of PBIS? Because if you're not a PBIS school, you were supposed to have a positive behavior plan in place. Whether you're PBIS or not, you have to have it. So, am I part of that? Do I have a team? Do I serve on that team? Do I lead that team? And how does that play into discipline at my school? Okay? So think about those things, because those were at the beginning that I don't want you to lose. I want you to go back and think about those things and how they are at your school, and if they need tweaking, then it's time to have conversations. The administration get together, decide who is my team, who's my discipline team, who do I want as part of that. It's not just me and you, okay?
And if you don't know where to start with PBIS still,
Erica.
Oh, she's gone. She's going to do an observation. But and I will gladly, this is my passion. I love this stuff, and it's hard stuff, but I will gladly sit down and talk with you. Erica's a fantastic one to talk to. Kathy, Brian, any of us will bounce ideas around with you, and just know, if it's not working now, what are you doing different? And let's figure out something you can try. Thank you guys for your time.
Some of these codes aren't working. What do we do?
And the AS400, they're not working.
Yeah.